Chapter 29. One Step at a Time. West gritted his teeth as he dragged himself up the freezing slope. His fingers were numb and weak, and trembling from clawing at the chill earth, the icy tree roots, the freezing snow for handhold. His lips were cracked. His nose was endlessly running. The rims of his nostrils were horribly sore. The very air cut into his throat and nipped at his lungs, smoked back out in tickling wheezes. He wondered if giving his coat to Ladisla had been the worst decision of his life. He decided it probably had been, except for saving the selfish bastard in the first place, of course. Even when he had been training for the contest 5 hours a day, he had never imagined that he could be so tired. Next to Three Trees, Lord Marshal Varuz seemed an almost laughably soft taskmaster. West was shaken awake before dawn every morning, and scarcely allowed to rest until after the last light faded. The Northmen were machines, every one of them, men carved from wood who never got tired, who felt no pain. Every one of West's muscles ached from their merciless pace. He was covered in bruises and scratches from 100 falls and scrambles. His feet were raw and blistered in his wet boots. Then there was the familiar pulsing in the head, throbbing away to the rhythm of his labored heartbeat, mingling unpleasantly with the burning of the wound on his scalp. The cold, the pain, and the fatigue were bad enough. But still worse was the overwhelming sense of shame and guilt and failure that crushed him down with every step. He had been sent with Ladisla to make sure there were no disasters. The result had been a disaster on a scale almost incomprehensible. An entire division massacred. How many children without fathers? How many wives without husbands? How many parents without sons? If only he could have done more. He told himself for the 1,000th time, bunching his bloodless hands into fists. If only he could have convinced the prince to stay behind the river, all those men might not be dead. So many dead. He hardly knew whether to pity or envy them. One step at a time, he muttered to himself as he clambered up the slope. That was the only way to look at it. If you clenched your teeth hard enough and took enough strides, you could get anywhere. One painful, weary, freezing, guilty step at a time. What else could you do? No sooner had they finally made it to the top of the hill than Prince Ladisla flung himself down against the roots of a tree, as he did at least once an hour. "Colonel West, please!" he gasped for air, breath steaming round his puffy face. He had 2 lines of glistening snot on his pale top lip, just like a toddler. "I can go no further." Tell them to stop, for pity's sake," West cursed under his breath. The Northmen were annoyed enough as it was, and making less and less effort to disguise the fact. But, like it or not, Ladisla was still his commander. Not to mention the heir to the throne. West could hardly order him to get up. "Three Trees," he wheezed. The old warrior frowned over his shoulder. "You better not be asking me to stop, lad. By dead again. You Southerners got no bones in you at all. No wonder Beethard gave you such a kicking. If you bastards don't learn to march, he'll be giving you another, I can tell you that. Please, just for a moment." Three Trees glared down at the sprawling prince and shook his head with disgust. "All right then, you can sit a minute if I'll get you moving the quicker, but don't get used to it, you hear? We've not covered half the ground we need to today, if we're to keep ahead of Beethard." And he stalked off to shout at the dogman. West sank down onto his haunches, working his numb toes, cupping his icy hands and blowing into them. He wanted to sprawl out like Ladisla, but he knew from harsh experience that if he stopped moving, starting up again would be all the more painful. Pike and his daughter stood over them, scarcely even too far out of breath. It was harsh proof, if any were really needed, that working metal in a penal colony was better preparation for slogging across brutal country than a life of uninterrupted ease. Ladisla seemed to guess what he was thinking. "You've no idea how hard this is for me," he blurted. "No, of course," snapped West, his patience worn down to a stub. "You've got the extra weight of my coat to carry." The prince blinked, then looked down at the wet ground, his jaw muscles working silently. "You're right. I'm sorry. I realize I owe you my life, of course. Not used to this sort of thing, you see. Not used to it at all." He plucked at the frayed and filthy lapels of the coat and gave a sorry chuckle. "My mother always told me that a man should be well presented under all circumstances. I wonder what she'd make of this." West noticed he didn't offer to give it back, though. Ladisla hunched his shoulders. "I suppose I must shoulder a portion of the blame for this whole business. A portion? West would have liked to serve him a portion of his boot. I should have listened to you, Colonel. I knew it all along. Caution is the best policy in war, eh? That's always been my motto. Let that fool Smund talk me into rashness. He always was an idiot. Lord Smund gave his life, muttered West. Shame he didn't give it a day earlier. We might not be in this fix. The prince's lip quivered slightly. What do you think they'll say about this back home? West, what do you think they'll say about me now? I've no idea, Your Highness. It could hardly be any worse than what they said already. West tried to squash his anger and put himself in Ladislaw's position. He was so utterly unprepared for the hardship of this march, so completely without resources, so entirely dependent on others for everything. A man who had never had to make a decision more important than which hat to wear, who now had to come to terms with his responsibility for thousands of deaths. Small wonder he had no idea how to go about it. If only they hadn't run. Ladislaw clenched his fist and thumped petulantly at a tree root. Why didn't they stand and fight, the cowardly bastards? Why didn't they fight? West closed his eyes, did his best to ignore the cold and the hunger and the pain, and to push away the fury in his chest. This was always the way of it. Just when Ladislaw was finally starting to arouse some sympathy, he would let fall some loathsome utterance which brought West's distaste for the man flooding back. I couldn't possibly say, Your Highness, he managed to squeeze through his gritted teeth. Right, grumbled Three Trees. That's your lot. On your feet again, and no excuses. Not up again already, is it, Colonel? I'm afraid so. The prince sighed and dragged himself wincing to his feet. I've no notion of how they can keep this up, West. One stride at a time, Your Highness. Of course, muttered Ladislaw, starting to stumble off through the trees after the two convicts. One stride at a time. West worked his aching ankles for a moment, and then bent down to follow, when he felt a shadow fall across him. He looked up to see that Black Dow had stepped into his path, blocking the way with one heavy shoulder, his snarling face no more than a foot away. He nodded towards the prince's slow-moving back. You want me to kill him? He growled in Northern. If you touch any one of them. West had spat out the words before he had any idea of how to finish. I'll kill you. What else could he say? He felt like a child making ludicrous threats in a schoolyard. An extremely cold and dangerous schoolyard, and to a boy twice his size. But Dow only grinned. That's a big temper you got on you for a skinny man. A lot of killing we're talking about, all of a sudden. You sure you got the bones for it? West tried to look as big as he could, which wasn't easy standing down a slope and hunched over with exhaustion. You have to show no fear. If you are to calm a dangerous situation, however much you might be feeling, I'd hate to miss it. Oh, don't worry about that, whispered Dow, turning his head and spitting on the ground. You'll know it's time when you wake up with your throat cut. And he sauntered off up the muddy slope, slow enough to show he wasn't scared. West wished that he could have said the same. His heart was pounding as he pushed on between the trees after the others. He trudged doggedly past Ladislaw and caught up to Cathal, falling into step beside her. You all right? He asked. I'd been worse. She looked him up and down. How about you? West suddenly realized what a state he must look. He had an old sack with holes cut in it for his arms pulled over his filthy uniform. His belt buckled tight over the top with a heavy sword pushed through it and knocking against his leg. There was an itchy growth of half-beard across his rattling jaw, and he guessed that his face must have been a mixture of angry pink and corpse gray. He wedged his hands under his armpits and gave a sad grin. Cold, you look it. Should have kept your coat, maybe. He had to nod at that. He peered through the branches of the pines at Dow's back and cleared his throat. None of them have been bothering you, have they? Bothering me? Bothering me? Well, you know, he said awkwardly. A woman in amongst all these men, they're not used to it. The way that Mandow stares at you. That's very noble of you, Colonel. But I wouldn't worry about them. I doubt they'll do anything more than stare. And I've dealt with worse than that. Worse than him? First camp I was in, the commandant took a liking to me. Still had the glow of a good free life on my skin, I suppose. He starved me to get what he wanted. 5 days with no food. West winced, and that was long enough to make him give up? They don't give up. 5 days was all I could stand. You do what you have to. You mean? What you have to, she shrugged. I'm not proud, but I'm not ashamed either. Pride and shame, neither one will feed you. The only thing I regret is those 5 days of hunger. 5 days when I could have eaten well. You do what you have to. I don't care who you are. Once you start starving, she shrugged again. What about your father, Pike? She looked up at the burnt-faced convict ahead of them. He's a good man, but he's no relative of mine. But I've no idea what became of my real family. Split up all over Angland, probably, if they're still alive. So sometimes, if you pretend you're family, people act differently. We've helped each other out. If it wasn't for Pike, I suppose I'd still be hammering metal in the camp. Instead of which you're enjoying this wonderful outing, huh? You make do with what you're given. She put her head down and quickened her pace, stalking off through the trees. West watched her go. She had some bones to her, the Northmen would have said. Ladisla could have learned a thing or two from her tight-lipped determination. West looked over his shoulder at the prince, stumbling daintily through the mud with a petulant frown on his face. He blew out a smoky sigh. It seemed that it was far too late for Ladisla to learn anything. A miserable meal of a chunk of old bread and a cup of cold stew. 3 trees wouldn't let them have a fire, for all of Ladisla's begging. Too much risk of being seen, so they sat and spoke quietly in the gathering gloom, a little way from the Northmen. Talking was good, if only to keep one's mind from the cold and the aches and the discomfort. If only to stop one's teeth from chattering. You said you fought in Kanta, eh, Pike? In the war. That's right. I was a sergeant there. Pike nodded slowly, his eyes glittering in the pink mess of his face. Hard to believe we were always too hot, eh? West gave a sad gurgle. The closest thing to a laugh that he could manage, which was your unit. I was in the 1st Regiment of the King's Own Cavalry, under Colonel Glokta. But that was my regiment. I know. I don't remember you. Pike's burns shifted in a way that West thought might have been a smile. I looked different back then. I remember you, though. Lieutenant West. The men liked you. Good man to go to with a problem. West swallowed. He wasn't much for fixing problems now, only for making them. So how did you end up in the camp? Pike and Cathal exchanged glances. In general, among the convicts you don't ask. Oh, West looked down, rubbed his hands together. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. No offense. Pike sniffed and rubbed at the side of his melted nose. I made some mistakes. Let's leave it at that. You got a family waiting for you. West winced, folded his arms tight across his chest. I have a sister back home in Adua. She's complicated. He thought it best to end there. You? I had a wife. When I was sent here, she chose to stay behind. I used to hate her for it, but you know what? I can't say I wouldn't have done the same. Ladisla emerged from the trees, wiping his hands on the hem of West's coat. That's better. Must have been that damn meat this morning. He sat down between West and Cathal, and she scowled as if someone had dropped a shovelful of shit next to her. It was safe to say the two of them were not getting on. What were we speaking of? West winced. Pike was just mentioning his wife. Oh? You know, of course, that I'm engaged to be married to the Princess Therese, daughter of Grand Duke Orso of Talons. She is a famous beauty. Ladisla trailed off, frowning round at the shadowy trees, as if even he was dimly aware of how bizarre talk of such matters seemed in the wilds of Angland, though I am beginning to suspect that she is less than entirely delighted with the match. One can't imagine why, murmured Cathal, at least the 10th jibe of the evening. I am the heir to the throne, snapped the prince, and will one day be your king. It would not hurt anyone for you to treat me with a measure of respect. She laughed in his face. I've no country and no king, and certainly no respect for you. Ladisla gasped with indignation. I will not be spoken to like. Black Dow loomed up over them from nowhere. Shut his fucking mouth, he snarled in Northern, stabbing at the air with one thick finger. Baythod might have ears anywhere. Stop his tongue flapping or it's coming out! And he melted away into the shadows. He would like us to be quiet, Your Highness, translated West in a whisper. The prince swallowed. So I gather. He and Cathal hunched their shoulders and glared at each other in silence. West lay on his back on the hard ground. the canvas creaking just above his face, watching the snow fall gently down beyond the black lumps of his boots. Cathal was pressed up against him on one side, the dogman on the other. The rest of the band were all around, squeezed in tight together under a great smelly blanket, all except for Dow, who was out there taking watch. Cold like this was an amazing thing for making people familiar with each other. There was a rumbling snore coming from the far end of the group. 3 trees or Tool, probably. The dogman tended to twitch a lot in his sleep, jolting and stretching and twittering meaningless sounds. Ladislaw's breath wheezed out on the right, chesty sounding and weak. All sleeping, more or less, as soon as they put their heads down. But West could not sleep. He was too busy thinking about all the hardships and the defeats and the terrible dangers they were in. And not only them. Marshal Burr might be out there in the forests of Angland somewhere, hurrying south to the rescue, not knowing that he was falling into a trap, not knowing that Beethard was expecting him. The situation was dire, but against all reason, West's heart felt light. The fact was, out here, things were simple. There were no daily battles to be fought, no prejudices to overcome, no need to think more than an hour ahead. He felt free for the first time in months. He winced and stretched his aching legs, felt Cathal shift in her sleep beside him, her head falling against his shoulder, her cheek pressing into his dirty uniform. He could feel the warmth of her breath on his face, the warmth of her body through their clothes. A pleasant warmth. The effect was only slightly spoiled by the stink of sweat and wet earth, and the dogman squeaking and muttering in his other ear. West closed his eyes, the faintest grin on his face. Perhaps things could still be put right. Perhaps he still had the chance to be a hero, if he could just get Ladislaw back alive to Lord Marshal Burr. Chapter 30. The rest is wasted breath. Ferro rode and watched the land. Still they followed the dark water. Still the wind blew cold through her clothes. Still the looming sky was heavy with chaos, and yet the country was changing. Where it had been flat as a table, now it was full of rises and sudden, hidden troughs. Land that men could hide in, and she did not like that thought. Not that she was fearful, for Ferro Mulgin feared no man. But she had to look and listen all the more carefully, for signs that anyone had passed, for signs that anyone was waiting. That was simple good sense. The grass had changed as well. She had grown used to it all around, tall and waving in the wind. But here it was short and dry, and withered pale like straw. It was getting shorter, too, as they went further. Today there were bald patches scattered round, bare earth where nothing grew, empty earth like the dust of the Badlands, dead earth, and dead for no reason that she could see. She frowned out across the crinkled plain, out towards far distant hills, a faint and ragged line above the horizon. Nothing moved in all that vast space, nothing but them and the impatient clouds. And one bird, hovering high, high up, almost still on the air, long feathers on its dark wing tips fluttering. First bird I seen in 2 days, grunted 9 fingers, peering up at it suspiciously. "Huh," she grunted. "The birds have more sense than us. What are we doing here? Got nowhere better to be. Ferro had better places to be. Anywhere there were Gurkish to kill. Speak for yourself." "What? You got a crowd of friends back in the Badlands, all asking after you? Where did Ferro get to? The laughs all dried up since she went away." And he snorted as if he had said something funny. Ferro did not see what. "We can't all be as well loved as you, Pink." She gave a snort of her own. "I'm sure they will have a feast ready for you when you get back to the north." "Oh, there'll be a feast, all right. Just as soon as they've hung me." She thought about that for a minute, looking sideways at him from the corners of her eyes, looking without turning her head, so if he glanced over she could flick her eyes away and pretend she never was looking at all. She had to admit, now that she was getting used to him, the big Pink was not so bad. They had fought together more than once, and he had always done his share. They had agreed to bury each other if need be, and she trusted him to do it. Strange looking, strange sounding, but she had yet to hear him say he would do a thing, and see him not do it, which made him one of the better men she had known. Best not to tell him that, of course, or give away the slightest sign that she thought it. That would be when he let her down. "You got no one, then?" she asked. "No one but enemies. Why aren't you fighting them?" "Fighting? It's got me everything I have." And he held his big empty hands up to show her. Nothing but an evil reputation and an awful lot of men with a burning need to kill me. Fighting! Ha! The better you are at it, the worse off it leaves you. I've settled some scores, and that can feel grand, but the feeling don't last long. Vengeance won't keep you warm nights, and that's a fact. Overrated. Won't do on its own. You need something else. Ferro shook her head. You expect too much out of life, Pink. He grinned. And here was me thinking you expect too little. Expect nothing, and you won't be disappointed. Expect nothing, and you'll get nothing. Ferro scowled at him. That was the thing about talk. Somehow it always took her where she did not want to go. Lack of practice, maybe. She jerked her reins and nudged her horse off with her heels, away from Nine Fingers and the others, out to the side, on her own. Silence then. Silence was dull, but it was honest. She frowned across at Luther, sitting up in the cart, and he grinned back like an idiot, as wide as he could with bandages over half his face. He seemed different somehow, and she did not like it. Last time she had changed his dressings he had thanked her, and that seemed odd. Ferro did not like thanks. They usually hid something. It niggled at her to have done something that deserved a thanking. Helping others led to friendships. Friendships led to disappointment at best, at worst, betrayal. Luther was saying something to Nine Fingers now, talking up to him from down in the cart. The Northman tipped back his head and roared with stupid laughter, making his horse startle and nearly dump him to the ground. Bayaz swayed contentedly in his saddle, happy creases round the corners of his eyes as he watched Nine Fingers fumble with his reins. Ferro scowled off across the plain. She had much preferred it when no one had liked each other. That was comfortable and familiar, that she understood. Trust and comradeship and good humor, these things were so far in the past for her that they were almost unknown. And who likes the unknown? Ferro had seen a lot of dead men. She had made more than her share. She had buried a good few with her own hands. Death was her trade and her pastime, but she had never seen near so many corpses all at once. The sickly grass was scattered with them. She slid down from her saddle and walked among the bodies. There was nothing to tell who fought who, or one side from the other. The dead all look alike, especially once they have been picked over their armor and their weapons, and half their clothes taken. They lay heaped thick and tangled in one spot, in the long shadow of a broken pillar, an ancient-looking thing, split and shattered, crumbling stones sprouting with withered grass and spotted with lichen. A big black bird sat on top of it, wings folded, peering at Ferro with beady, unblinking eyes as she came close. The corpse of a huge man was lying half-propped against the battered stone below, a broken staff still gripped in his lifeless hand, dark blood and dark dirt crusted under the nails. Most likely the staff had held a flag, Ferro thought. Soldiers seemed to care a great deal for flags. She had never understood that. You could not kill a man with one. You could not protect yourself with one. And yet men would die for flags. Foolishness, she muttered, frowning up at the big bird on the pillar. A massacre, said Nine Fingers. Bayaz grunted and rubbed his chin. But of who? By whom? Ferro could see Luther's swollen face peering wide-eyed and worried over the side of the cart. Quai was just in front of him on the driver's seat, the reins dangling loose in his hands, his face expressionless as he looked down at the corpses. Ferro turned over one of the bodies and sniffed at it. Pale skin, dark lips, no smell yet. It did not happen long ago. 2 days, maybe, but no flies. Nine Fingers frowned at the bodies. A few birds were perched on them, watching. Just birds? And they're not eating. Strange. Not really, friend. Ferro jerked her head up. A man was striding quickly towards them across the battlefield, a tall pink in a ragged coat, a gnarled length of wood in one hand. He had an unkempt head of greasy hair, a long, matted beard. His eyes bulged bright and wild, in a face carved with deep lines. Ferro stared at him, not sure how he could have come so close without her noticing. The birds rose up from the bodies at the sound of his voice, but they did not scatter from him. They flew towards him, some settling on his shoulders, some flapping about his head and round him in wide circles. Ferro reached for her bow, snatching at an arrow, but Bayaz held out his arm. No, do you see this? The tall pink pointed at the broken pillar, and the bird flapped from it and across onto his outstretched finger. 100-mile column, 100 miles to AUKUS. He dropped his arm and the bird hopped onto his shoulder, next to the others, and sat there still and silent. You stand on the very borders of the dead land. No animals come here that are not made to come. How now, brother? Called Bayaz, and Ferro shoved her arrow unhappily away. Another magus. She might have guessed. Whenever you put two of these old fools together, there was sure to be a lot of lips flapping, a lot of words made. And that meant a lot of lies. The great Bayaz, shouted the new arrival as he came closer. The first of the Magi. I heard tell you were coming from the birds of the air, the fish of the water, the beasts of the earth, and now I see with my own eyes, and yet still I scarcely believe. Can it be that those blessed feet should touch this bloody ground? He planted his staff on the earth, and as he did the big black bird scrambled from his shoulder and grasped the tip with its claws, flapping its wings until it was settled. Ferro took a cautious step back, putting one hand on her knife. She did not intend to be shat on by one of those things. Zacharias, said Bayaz, swinging down stiffly from his saddle. Although it seemed to Ferro, he said the name with little joy. You look in good health, brother. I look tired. I look tired and dirty and mad, for that is what I am. You are difficult to find, Bayaz. I have been searching all across the plain and back. We have been keeping out of sight. Khalul's allies are seeking for us also. Bayaz's eyes twitched over the carnage. Is this your work? That of my charge, young Glokta. He is fierce as a lion, I tell you, and makes as fine an emperor as the great men of old. He has captured his greatest rival, his brother Scario, and has shown him mercy. Zacharias sniffed. Not my advice, but the young will have their way. These were the last of Scario's men, those who would not surrender. He flapped a careless hand at the corpses, and the birds on his shoulders flapped with him. Mercy only goes so far, observed Bayaz. They would not run into the dead land, so here they made their stand, and here they died, in the shadow of the 100-mile columns. Glokta took the standard of the 3rd Legion from them, the very standard that Stolicus himself rode into battle under, a relic of the old time, just as you and I are, brother. Bayaz did not seem impressed. A piece of old cloth. It did these fellows precious little good. Carrying a stretch of moth food does not make a man, Stolicus. Perhaps not. The thing is much faded, truth be told. Its jewels were all torn out and sold long ago to buy weapons. Jewels are a luxury in these days, but everyone needs weapons. Where is your young emperor now? Already on his way back eastwards with no time even to burn the dead. He is heading for Darmium, to lay siege to the city and hang this madman Cabrian from the walls. Then perhaps we can have peace. Bayaz gave a joyless snort. Do you even remember what it feels like to have peace? You might be surprised at what I remember. And Zacharias' bulging eyes stared down at Bayaz. But how are matters in the wider world? How is Yulwe? Watching, as always. And what of our other brother, the shame of our family, the great prophet Khalul? Bayaz's face grew hard. He grows in strength. He begins to move. He senses his moment has come. And you mean to stop him, of course. What else should I do? Khalul was in the south when last I heard, yet you journey westward. Have you lost your way, brother? There is nothing out here but the ruins of the past. There is power in the past. Power, war. Ha! You never change. Strange company you ride with, Bayaz. Young Malachus Quai I know, of course. How goes it, teller of tales? He called out to the apprentice. How goes it, talker? How does my brother treat you? Quay stayed hunched on his cart. Well enough, that's all. You have learned to stay silent then, at least. How did you teach him that, Bayaz? That I never could make him learn. Bayaz frowned up at Quay. I hardly had to. So, what did Juven say? The best lessons one teaches oneself. Zacharias turned his bulging eyes on Ferro, and the eyes of his birds turned with him, all as one. This is a strange one you have here. She has the blood. You still needed one who can speak with the spirits. He can. Bayaz nodded his head at 90 fingers. The big pink had been fiddling with his saddle, but now he looked up, bewildered. The birds on his shoulders and his head and the tip of his staff stood tall and spread their wings, and flapped and squawked. "Listen to me, brother, before it is too late. Give up this folly. I will stand with you against Khalul. I will stand with you and Yulway. The three of us together, as it was in the old time, as it was against the Maker, the mighty united. I will help you." There was a long silence, and hard lines spread out across Bayaz's face. "You will help me? If only you had offered your help long ago, after the Maker fell, when I begged you for it. Then we might have torn up Khalul's madness before it put down roots. Now the whole south swarms with eaters, making the world their playground, treating the solemn word of our master with open scorn. The three of us will not be enough, I think. What then? Will you lure Carneal from her books? Will you find Liru, under whatever stone she has crawled beneath in all of the wide circle of the world? Will you bring Carnault back from across the wide ocean, or Anselmi and Broken Tooth from the land of the dead? The Magi united, is it?" And Bayaz's lip curled into a sneer. "That time is done, brother. That ship sailed long ago, never to return, and we were not on it." "I see," hissed Zacharias, red-streaked eyes bulging wider than ever. "And if you find what you seek, what then? Do you truly suppose that you can control it? Do you dare to imagine that you can do what Glustrod and Canidius and Juvens himself could not? I am the wiser for their mistakes." "I hardly think so. You would punish one crime with a worse." Bayaz's thin lips and hollow cheeks turned sharper still. No sadness, no fear, but much anger of his own. "This war was not of my making, brother. Did I break the second law? Did I make slaves of half the South for the sake of my vanity? No. But we each had our part in it, and you more than most. Strange how I remember things that you leave out. How you squabbled with Khalul. How Juvens determined to separate you. How you sought out the Maker, persuaded him to share his secrets." Zacharias laughed, a harsh cackle, and his birds croaked and squawked along with him. "I dare say he never intended to share his daughter with you, eh, Bayaz?" "The Maker's daughter, Ptolemy? Is there room in your memory for her?" Bayaz's eyes glittered cold. "Perhaps the blame is mine," he whispered. "The solution shall be mine also. Do you think Ys spoke the first law on a whim? An, do you think Juvens put this thing at the edge of the world because it was safe? It is evil." "Evil," Bayaz snorted his contempt. "A word for children, a word the ignorant use for those who disagree with them. I thought we grew out of such notions long centuries ago. But the risks, I am resolved." And Bayaz's voice was iron, and well sharpened. "I have thought for long years upon it. You have said your piece, Zacharias, but you have offered me no other choices. Try and stop me if you must. Otherwise, stand aside. Then nothing has changed." The old man turned to look at Ferro, his creased face twitching, and the dark eyes of his birds looked with him. "And what of you, Devil Blood? Do you know what he would have you touch? Do you understand what he would have you carry? Do you have an inkling of the dangers?" A small bird hopped from his shoulder and started twittering round and round Ferro's head in circles. "You would be better to run and never to stop running. You all would." Ferro's lip curled. She slapped the bird out of the air, and it clattered to the ground, hopping and tweeting away between the corpses. The others squawked and hissed and clucked their anger, but she ignored them. "You do not know me, old fool pink with a dirty beard. Do not pretend to understand me, or to know what I know, or what I have been offered. Why should I prefer the word of one old liar over another? Take your birds and keep your nose to your own business. Then we will have no quarrel. The rest is wasted breath." Zacharias and his birds blinked. He frowned, opened his mouth, then shut it silently again as Ferro swung herself up into her saddle and jerked her horse round towards the west. She heard the sounds of the others following, hooves thumping, Quay cracking the reins of the cart. Then Bayaz's voice. "Listen to the birds of the air, the fish of the water, the beasts of the earth. Soon you will hear that Khalul has been finished. His eaters turned to dust, the mistakes of the past buried, as they should have been long ago. I hope so. But I fear the news will be worse." Ferro looked over her shoulder and saw the two old men exchanging one more stare. The mistakes of the past are not so easily buried. I earnestly hope that you fail. Look around you, old friend." And the first of the Magi smiled as he clambered up into his saddle. "None of your hopes ever come to anything." And so they rode away from the corpses in silence, past the broken 100-mile column, and into the dead land, towards the ruins of the past, towards Alcus. Under a darkening sky, Chapter 31, A Matter of Time. To Arch-Lector Sult, head of His Majesty's Inquisition. Your Eminence, 6 weeks now, we have held the Gurkish back. Each morning they brave our murderous fire to tip earth and stone into our ditch. Each night we lower men from the walls to try and dig it out. In spite of all our efforts, they have finally succeeded in filling the channel in 2 places. Daily now, scaling parties rush forward from the Gurkish lines and set their ladders, sometimes making it onto the walls themselves, only to be bloodily repulsed. Meanwhile, the bombardment by catapults continues, and several sections of the walls are dangerously weakened. They have been shored up, but it might not be long before the Gurkish have a practicable breach. Barricades have been raised on the inside to contain them should they make it through into the lower city. Our defenses are tested to the limit, but no man entertains a thought of surrender. We will fight on. As always, Your Eminence, I serve and obey. Sandan Glokta, superior of Dagosca. Glokta held his breath, licking at his gums as he watched the dust clouds settling across the roofs of the slums through his eyeglass. The last crashes and clatters of falling stones faded, and Dagosca, for that one moment, was strangely silent. The world holds its breath. Then the distant screaming reached him on his balcony, thrust out from the wall of the citadel, high above the city. A screaming he remembered well from battlefields, both old and new, and hardly happy memories. The Gurkish war cry, "The enemy are coming." Now he knew they were charging across the open ground before the walls, as they had done so many times these past weeks. But this time they have a breach. He watched the tiny shapes of soldiers moving on the dust-coated walls and towers to either side of the gap. He moved his eyeglass down to take in the wide half-circle of barricades, the triple ranks of men squatting behind them, waiting for the Gurkish to come. Glokta frowned and worked his numb left foot inside his boot. A meager-seeming defense indeed, but all we have. Now Gurkish soldiers began to pour through the yawning breach like black ants swarming from a nest. A crowd of jostling men, twinkling steel, waving banners, emerging from the clouds of brown dust, scrambling down the great heap of fallen masonry, and straight into a furious hail of flatbow bolts, first through the breach, an unenviable position. The front ranks were mown down as they came on, tiny shapes falling and tumbling down the hill of rubble behind the walls. Many fell, but there were always more, pressing in over the bodies of their comrades, struggling forward over the mass of broken stones and shattered timbers, and into the city. Now another cry floated up, and Glokta saw the defenders charge from behind their barricades. Union soldiers, mercenaries, Dagoscans, all hurled themselves towards the breach. At this distance, it all seemed to move with absurd slowness, a stream of oil and a stream of water dribbling towards one another. They met, and it became impossible to tell one side from the other. A flowing mass, punctuated by glittering metal, rippling and surging like the sea, a colorful flag or two hanging limp above. The cries and screams hung over the city, echoing, shifting with the breeze. The far-off swell of pain and fury, the clatter and din of combat. Sometimes it sounded like a distant storm, incomprehensible. Sometimes a single cry or word would float to Glokta's ear with surprising clarity. It reminded him of the sound of the crowd at the contest, except the blades are not blunted now. Both sides are in deadly earnest. How many already dead this morning, I wonder? He turned to General Visbruck, sweating beside him in his immaculate uniform. Have you ever fought in a melee like that, General? A straight fight, toe-to-toe at push of pike, as they say. Visbruck did not pause for a moment from squinting eagerly through his own eyeglass. No, Darban, I have not. I wouldn't recommend it. I have only done it once, and I am not keen to repeat the experience. He shifted the handle of his cane in his sweaty palm. Not that that's terribly likely now, of course. I fought on horseback often enough, charged small bodies of infantry, broke and pursued them. A noble business, cutting men down as they run. I earned all kinds of praise for it. I soon discovered a battle on foot is a different matter. The crush is so tight you can hardly take a breath, let alone perform acts of heroism. The heroes are the ones lucky enough to live through it. He snorted with joyless laughter. I remember being pushed up against a Gurkish officer, as close to each other as lovers, neither one of us able to strike or do anything but snarl at each other. Spear points digging everywhere, at random. Men pushed onto the weapons of their own side or crushed underfoot, more killed by mishap than design. The whole business is one giant mishap, an ugly affair, muttered Visbruck. But it has to be done. So it does. So it does. Glokta could see a Gurkish standard waving around above the boiling throng, silk flapping, tattered and stained. Stones flung from the broken walls above began to crash down amongst them. Men pressed in helpless shoulder to shoulder, unable to move. A great vat of boiling water was upended into their midst from high above. The Gurkish had lost all semblance of order as they came through the breach, and now the formless mass of men began to waver. The defenders pressed in on them from all sides, relentless, shoving with pike and shield, hacking with sword and axe, trampling the fallen under their boots. "We're driving them back," came Visbruck's voice. "Yes," muttered Glokta, peering through his eyeglass at the desperate fighting. "So it would seem. And my joy is limitless. The Gurkish assault had been surrounded, and men were falling fast, stumbling back up the hill of rubble towards the breach. Gradually the survivors were driven out and down into the no-man's land behind, flatbows on the walls firing into the mass of men as they fled, spreading panic and murder. The vague sound of the defenders cheering filtered up to them on the walls of the citadel. One more assault defeated. Scores of Gurkish killed, but there are always more. If they break through the barricades and into the lower city, we are finished. They can keep coming as often as they like. We need only lose once, and the game is done. It would seem the day is ours, this one at least." Glokta limped to the corner of the balcony and peered southwards through his eyeglass, down into the bay and the southern sea beyond. There was nothing but calm water, glittering bright to the flat horizon, and still no sign of any Gurkish ships. Visbruck cleared his throat. "With the greatest of respect, meaning none, I suppose? The Gurkish have never been sailors. Is there any reason to suppose that they have ships now? Only that an old black wizard appeared in my chambers in the dead of night and told me to watch out for some. Perhaps he keeps his fleet in reserve, waiting for a better time, refusing to show his whole hand until he needs to. But with ships, he could blockade us, starve us out, get around our defenses. He need not have squandered all those soldiers. If the Emperor of Gurkhul has one thing in abundance, General, it is more soldiers. They have made a workable breach." Glokta scanned along the walls until he came to the other weak spot. He could see the great cracks in the masonry on the inside, shored up with heavy beams, with heaped-up rubble, but still bowing inwards, more each day. And they will soon have another. They have filled the ditch in 4 places. Meanwhile, our numbers dwindle. Our morale falters. They don't need ships, but we have them. Glokta was surprised to find the general had stepped up close beside him and was speaking softly and urgently, looking earnestly into his eyes, like a man proposing marriage, or treason. "I wonder which we have here." "There is still time," muttered Visbruck, his eyes swiveling nervously towards the door and back. "We control the bay. As long as we still hold the lower city, we hold the wharves. We can pull out the Union forces, the civilians at least. There are still some wives and children of officers left in the citadel, a scattering of merchants and craftsmen who settled in the upper city and are reluctant to leave. It could be done swiftly." Glokta frowned. "True, perhaps. But the Archlector's orders were otherwise. The civilians can make their own arrangements, if they so desire. The Union troops will not be going anywhere, except onto their funeral pyres, of course." But Visbruck took his silence for encouragement. "If you were to give me the word, it could be done this very evening, and all away before. And what will become of us all, General, when we step down onto Union soil? A tearful reunion with our masters in the Agrient. Some of us would soon be crying, I do not doubt. Or should we take the ships and sail to far-off Soljuk? Do you suppose to live long lives of ease and plenty?" Glokta slowly shook his head. "It is a charming fantasy, but that's all it is. Our orders are to hold the city. There can be no surrender, no backing down. No backing down. No sailing home. No sailing home, echoed Visbruck sourly. Meanwhile, the Gurkish press in closer every day. Our losses mount, and the lowest beggar in the city can see that we cannot hold the land walls for much longer. My men are close to mutiny, and the mercenaries are considerably less dependable. What would you have me tell them? That the closed council's orders do not include retreat? Tell them that reinforcements will be here any day. I've been telling them that for weeks. Then a few more days should make no difference. Visbruck blinked. And might I ask when reinforcements will arrive? Any. Glokta narrowed his eyes. Day. Until then we hold. But why? Visbruck's voice had gone high as a girl's. What for? The task is impossible. The waste. Why, damn it. Why? Always why? I grow bored of asking it. If you think I know the Archlector's mind, you're an even bigger idiot than I supposed. Glokta sucked slowly at his gums, thinking. You were right about one thing, however. The land walls may fall at any moment. We must prepare to withdraw into the upper city. But if we abandon the lower city, we abandon the docks. There can be no supplies brought in, no reinforcements, even if they do arrive. What of your fine speech to me, superior? The walls of the upper city are too long and too weak. If the land walls fall, the city is doomed. We must defeat them there or not at all. You told me. If the docks are lost, there can be no escape. My dear, plump pudding of a general, do you not see it? Escape has never been an option. Glokta grinned, showing Visbruck the empty holes in his teeth. If one plan fails, we must try another. The situation, as you have so cleverly pointed out, is desperate. Believe me, I would prefer it if the Emperor simply gave up and went home. But I hardly think we can count on that, do you? Send word to Koska and Kadia. All civilians should be moved out of the lower city tonight. We may need to pull back at a moment's notice. At least I won't have to limp so far to reach the front lines. The upper city will scarcely hold so many. They will be lining the streets, better than lining a grave pit. They will be sleeping in the squares and the hallways, preferable to sleeping in the ground. There are thousands of them down there. Then the sooner you start, the better. Glokta half ducked back as he stepped through the doorway. The heat beyond was almost unbearable. The reek of sweat and burnt flesh tickled unpleasantly at his throat. He wiped his eyes, already running with tears, on the back of his trembling hand, and squinted into the darkness. The three practicals took shape in the gloom. They were gathered round, masked faces lit from underneath by the angry orange of the brazier, all hard bright bone and hard dark shadow. Devils in hell. Vitari's shirt was soaked right through and stuck to her shoulders. Furious creases cut into her face. Severed was stripped to the waist, gasping breath muffled through his mask, lank hair flapping with sweat. Frost was as wet as if he had stood out in the rain, fat drops running down his pale skin, jaw muscles locked and bulging. The only one in the room who showed no sign of discomfort was Schickel. The girl had an ecstatic smile across her face as Vitari ground the sizzling iron into her chest, just as if it were the happiest moment of her life. Glokta swallowed as he watched, remembering being shown the brand himself, remembering pleading, begging, blubbering for mercy, remembering the feeling of the metal pressed into his skin, so searing hot it feels almost cold, the mindless din of his own screams, the stink of his own flesh burning. He could smell it now. First you suffer it yourself, then you inflict it on others, then you order it done. Such is the pattern of life. He shrugged his aching shoulders and hobbled forwards into the room. Progress, he croaked. Severad straightened up, grunting and arching his back, wiped his forehead and flicked sweat onto the slimy floor. I don't know about her, but I'm more than halfway to breaking. We're getting nowhere, snapped Vitari, tossing the black iron back in the brazier and sending up a shower of sparks. We tried blades, we tried hammers, we tried water, we tried fire. She won't say a word. Fucking bitch is made of stone. Softer than stone, hissed Severard. But she's nothing like us. He took a knife from the table. The blade, briefly flashing orange in the darkness, leaned forward and carved a long gash into Schickel's thin forearm. Her face barely even twitched while he did it. The wound hung open, glistening angry red. Severard dug his finger into it and twisted it round. Schickel showed not the slightest sign of being in pain. He pulled his finger out and held it up, rubbed the tip against his thumb. not even wet. It's like cutting into a week-old corpse. Glokta felt his leg trembling, and he winced and slid into the spare seat. Plainly, this is not normal. Unearthment, grunted Frost. But she's not healing the way she was. None of the cuts in her skin were closing. All hanging open, dead and dry as meat in a butcher's shop. Nor were the burns fading. Charred black stripes across her skin, like meat fresh from the grill. Just sits there, watching, said Severard. And not a word. Glokta frowned. Can this really be what I had in mind when I joined the Inquisition? The torture of young girls. He wiped the wet from under his stinging eyes. But then, this is both much more and much less than a girl. He remembered the hands clutching at him, the 3 practicals straining to pull her back. Much more, and much less than human. We must not make the same mistakes we made with the first of the Magi. We must keep an open mind, he murmured. Do you know what my father would say to that? The voice croaked out, deep and grinding raw, like an old man's, oddly wrong from that young, smooth face. Glokta felt his left eye twitching, the sweat trickling under his coat. Your father? Schickel smiled at him, eyes glinting in the darkness. It almost seemed as if the cuts in her flesh smiled with her. My father. The prophet, great Khalul. He would say that an open mind is like to an open wound. Vulnerable to poison, liable to fester, apt to give its owner only pain. Now you want to talk. Now I choose to. Why? Why not? Now that you know it is my choice, and not yours. Ask your questions, cripple. You should take your chances to learn when you can. God knows you could do with them. A man lost in the desert, I know the rest. Glokta paused. So many questions. But what to ask one such as this? You are an eater? We have other names for ourselves. But yes. She inclined her head gently, her eyes never leaving his. The priests made me eat my mother first. When they found me, it was that or die. And the need to live was so very great before. I wept afterwards, but that was long ago, and there are no tears left in me. I disgust myself, of course. Sometimes I need to kill, sometimes I wish to die. I deserve to. Of that I have no doubts. My only certainty. I should have known better than to expect straight answers. One almost feels nostalgic for the Mercers. Their crimes, at least, I could understand. Still, any answers are better than none. Why do you eat? Because the bird eats the worm. Because the spider eats the fly. Because Khalul desires it, and we are the prophet's children. Juvens was betrayed, and Khalul swore vengeance, but he stood alone against many. So he made his great sacrifice, and broke the second law, and the righteous joined with him, more and more with the passing years. Some joined him willingly, some not, but none have denied him. My siblings are many now, and each of us must make our sacrifice. Glokta gestured at the brazier. You feel no pain? I do not, but plentiful remorse. Strange, it's the other way around for me. You, I think, are the lucky one. He snorted. Easy to say until you find you can't piss without wanting to scream. I hardly remember what pain feels like now. All that was long ago. The gifts are different for each of us. Strength and speed and endurance beyond the limits of the human. Some of us can take forms or trick the eye, or even use the art, the way that Juvens taught his apprentices. The gifts are different for each of us, but the curse is the same. She stared at Glokta, head cocked over to one side. Let me guess. You can't stop eating. Not ever. And that is why the Gurkish appetite for slaves is never-ending. There is no resisting the prophet. I know. Great Father Khalul? And her eyes rolled up reverently towards the ceiling. Archpriest of the Temple of Sarkant, holiest of all whose feet touch the earth, humbler of the proud righter of wrongs, teller of truths. Light shines from him as it shines from the stars. When he speaks, it is with the voice of God. No doubt he shits golden turds as well. You believe all that rubbish? What does it matter what I believe? I don't make the choices. When your master gives you a task, you do your best at it, even if the task is a dark one. That much I can understand. Some of us are only suited to dark tasks. Once you've chosen your master, Schickel croaked dry laughter across the table. Few indeed are those who get a choice. We do as we are told. We stand or fall beside those who were born near to us, who look as we do, who speak the same words, and all the while we know as little of the reasons why as does the dust we return to. Her head sagged sideways, and a gash in her shoulder opened up as wide as a mouth. Do you think I like what I have become? Do you think I do not dream of being as others are? But once the change has come, you can never go back. Do you understand? Oh yes, few better. Why were you sent here? The work of the righteous is never ending. I came to see Dagaska return to the fold, to see its people worship God according to the prophet's teachings, to see my brothers and sisters fed. It seems you failed. Others will follow. There is no resisting the prophet. You are doomed. That much I know. Let us try another tack. What do you know about Bayaz? Ah, Bayaz. He was the prophet's brother. He is the start of this, and will be the end. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Liar and traitor. He killed his master. He murdered Juvens. Glokta frowned. That is not the way I heard the story. Everyone has their own way of telling every story, broken man. Have you not learned that yet? Her lip curled. You have no understanding of the war you fight in, of the weapons and the casualties, of the victories and the defeats, every day. You do not guess at the sides, or the causes, or the reasons. The battlefields are everywhere. I pity you are a dog, trying to understand the argument of scholars, and hearing nothing but barking. The righteous are coming. Kalul will sweep the earth clean of lies, and build a new order. Juvens will be avenged. It is foretold. It is ordained. It is promised. I doubt you'll see it. She grinned at him. I doubt you will either. My father would rather have taken this city without a fight, but if he must fight for it, then he will, and with no mercy, and with the fury of God behind him. That is the first step on the path he has chosen. On the path he has chosen for all of us. What step comes next? Do you think my masters tell me their plans? Do yours? I am a worm. I am nothing. And yet I am more than you are. What comes next? Hissed Glokta. Nothing but silence. Answer him, hissed Vitari. Frost hauled an iron from the brazier, the tip glowing orange, and ground it into Shikel's bare shoulder. Foul-smelling steam hissed up. Fat spat and sizzled, but the girl said nothing. Her lazy eyes watched her own flesh burn, without emotion. There will be no answers here. Only more questions. Always more questions. I've had enough, snarled Glokta as he seized hold of his cane and struggled up, squirming in a painful and futile effort to make his shirt come unstuck from his back. Vitari gestured at Shikel, her gleaming eyes still fixed on Glokta under their drooping lids, a faint smile still clinging to her lips. What should we do with this? An expendable agent of an uncaring master, sent unwilling to a faraway place to fight and kill for reasons she hardly understands. Sound familiar? Glokta grimaced as he turned his aching back on the stinking chamber. Burn it, he said. Glokta stood on his balcony in the sharp evening, frowning down towards the lower city. It was windy up here on the rock, a cold wind off the dark sea, whipping at Glokta's face, at his fingers on the dry parapet, slapping the tails of his coat against his legs. The closest thing we'll get to winter in this cursed crucible. The flames of the torches by the door flapped and flickered in their iron cages, two lights in the gathering darkness. There were more lights out there, many more. Lamps burned on the rigging of the Union ships in the harbor, their reflections flashing and breaking in the water below. Lights glowed in the windows of the dark palaces under the citadel, in the tops of the lofty spires of the great temple. Down in the slums, thousands of torches burned, rivers of tiny points of light flowing out of the buildings onto the roads towards the gates of the upper city. Refugees leaving their homes, such as they are, heading for safety, such as it is. How long can we keep them safe, I wonder, once the land walls fall? He knew the answer already. Not long. Superior. Why, Master Koska, I'm so glad you could join me, of course. There's nothing like a stroll in the evening air after a skirmish. The mercenary strutted over. Even in the gloom, Glokta could see the difference in him. He walked with a spring in his step, a glint in his eye, his hair neatly brushed, his mustache waxed stiff, an inch or two taller and a good 10 years younger. All of a sudden, he pranced to the parapet, closed his eyes, and sucked a deep breath through his sharp nose. "You look remarkably well for someone who has just fought in a battle." The Styrian grinned at him. "I wasn't so much in the battle as just behind it. I've always felt the very front is a poor place to fight from. No one can hear you with all the clatter. That, and the chances of being killed there are really very high, doubtless. How did it go for us?" "The Gurkish are still outside, so I'd say as far as battles go it went well. I doubt the dead would agree with me, but who cares a shit for their opinion?" He scratched happily at his neck. "We did well today, but tomorrow, and the day after, who can say? Still no chance of reinforcement?" Glokta shook his head and the Styrian took in a sharp breath. "It's all the same to me, of course, but you may want to consider a withdrawal while we still hold the bay. Everyone would like to withdraw. Even me." Glokta snorted. "The closed council hold my leash, and they say no. The king's honor will not permit it, they inform me, and apparently his honor is more valuable than our lives." Koska raised his brows. "Honor, eh? What the hell is that anyway? Every man thinks it's something different. You can't drink it. You can't fuck it. The more of it you have, the less good it does you. And if you've got none at all, you don't miss it." He shook his head. "But some men think it's the best thing in the world." "Ah," muttered Glokta, licking at his empty gums. "Honor is worth less than one's legs or one's teeth. A lesson I paid dearly for." He peered towards the shadowy outline of the land walls, studded with burning bonfires. The vague sounds of fighting could still be heard. The odd flaming arrows soared high into the air and fell in the ruined slums. "Even now the bloody business continues." He took a deep breath. "What are our chances of holding out for another week?" "Another week," Koska pursed his lips. "Reasonable. 2 weeks? 2? Koska clicked his tongue. "Less good, which would make a month a hopeless cause. Hopeless would be the word. You seem almost to revel in the situation." "Me? I've made a speciality from hopeless causes," he grinned at Glokta. "These days, they're the only ones that will have me. I know the feeling. Hold the land walls as long as you can, then pull back. The walls of the upper city must be our next line of defense." Koska's grin could just be seen shining in the darkness. "Hold as long as we can and then pull back. I can hardly wait, and perhaps we should prepare some surprises for our Gurkish guests when they finally make it past the walls. You know," and Glokta waved his hand absently. "Tripwires and hidden pits, spikes daubed with excrement and so on. You've some experience in that type of warfare, I dare say." "I am experienced in all types of warfare." Koska snapped his heels together and gave an elaborate salute. "Spikes and excrement. There's honor for you. This is war. The only honor is in winning. Talking of honor, you'd best let our friend General Visbruck know where your surprises are. It would be a shame if he were to impale himself by accident. Of course, superior. A dreadful shame." Glokta felt his hand bunching into a fist on the parapet. "We must make the Gurkish pay for every stride of ground. We must make them pay for my ruined leg, for every inch of dirt, for my missing teeth, for every meager shack and crumbling hut and worthless stretch of dust, for my weeping eye and my twisted back and my repulsive shadow of a life. Make them pay. Excellent. The only good Gurkish are the dead ones." The mercenary spun and marched through the door into the citadel, his spurs jingling, leaving Glokta alone on the flat roof. 1 week? Yes. 2 weeks? Perhaps. Any longer? Hopeless. There may have been no ships, but that old Riddler Yulway was still right. And so was Ida. There never was any chance. For all our efforts, for all our sacrifices, Dagoska must surely fall. It is only a matter of time now. He stared out across the darkened city. It was hard to separate the land from the sea in the blackness, the lights on the boats from the lights in the buildings, the torches on the rigging from the torches in the slums. All was a confusion of points of light, flowing around each other, disembodied in the void. There was only one certainty in all of it. We're finished, not tonight, but soon. We are surrounded, and the net will only draw tighter. It is a matter of time. Chapter 32. Scars. One by one, Ferro took out the stitches, slitting the thread neatly with the shining point of her knife, working them gently out of Luther's skin, dark fingertips moving quick and sure. Yellow eyes narrowed with concentration. Logan watched her work, shaking his head slowly at the skill of it. He'd seen it done often, but never so well. Luther barely even looked in pain, and he always looked in pain lately. Do we need another bandage on it? No. We let it breathe. The last stitch slid out, and Ferro tossed the bloody bits of thread away and rocked back on her knees to look at the results. "That's good," said Logan, voice hushed. He'd never guessed that it could come out half so well. Luther's jaw looked slightly bent in the firelight, like he was biting down on one side. There was a ragged notch out of his lip, and a forked scar torn from it down to the point of his chin. Pink dots on either side where the stitches had been. The skin around it stretched and twisted. Nothing more, but for some swelling that soon go down. That's some damn good stitching. I never saw any better. Where did you learn healing? A man called Aruf taught me. Well, he taught you well. Rare skill to have. Happy chance for us that he did it. I had to fuck him first. Ah, that did shine a bit of a different light on it. Ferro shrugged. I didn't mind. He was a good man, more or less, and he taught me how to kill, into the bargain. I've fucked a lot of worse men for a lot less. She frowned at Luther's jaw, pressing it with her thumbs, testing the flesh round the wound. A lot less. Right, muttered Logan. He exchanged a worried glance with Luther. This conversation hadn't gone at all the way he'd imagined. Maybe he should have expected that with Ferro. He spent half the time trying to prise a word out of her. Then when she did give him something, he didn't have a clue where to go with it. It's set, she grunted, after probing Luther's face for a moment in silence. Thank you. He grabbed hold of her hand as she moved back. Truly, I don't know what I'd have. She grimaced as if he'd slapped her and snatched her fingers away. Fine, but if you get your face smashed again, you can stitch it yourself. And she got up and stalked off, sat down in the shifting shadows in the corner of the ruin, as far away from the others as she could get without going outside. She seemed to like thanks even less than she liked any other kind of talk, but Luther was too pleased to finally have the dressings off to worry much about it. How does it look? He asked, peering down cross-eyed at his own chin, wincing and prodding at it with one finger. You might not be quite so pretty as you were, but you're still a damn sight better looking than me. Of course, he said, licking at the notch in his lip, half smiling. It isn't as though they cut my head right off. Logan grinned as he knelt down beside the pot and gave it a stir. He was getting on all right with Luther now. It was a harsh lesson, but a broken face had done that boy a power of good. It had taught him some respect, and a lot quicker than any amount of talk. It had taught him to be realistic, and that had to be a good thing. Small gestures and time rarely failed to win folk over. Then he caught sight of Ferro, frowning at him from the shadows, and he felt his grin sag. Some folk take longer than others, and a few never really get there. Black Dow had been like that, made to walk alone, Logan's father would have said. He looked back to the pot, but there wasn't much encouragement in it. Just porridge with some shreds of bacon and some chopped up roots. There was nothing to hunt out here. Dead land meant what it said. The grass on the plain had dwindled to brown tufts and gray dust. He looked round the ruined shell of the house they'd pitched camp in. Firelight flickered on broken stone, crumbled render, ancient splintered wood. No ferns rooted in the cracks, no saplings in the earth floor. Not even a shred of moss between the stones. Seemed to Logan as if no one but them had trodden there in centuries. Maybe they hadn't. Quiet, too. Not much wind tonight. Only the soft crackling of the fire and Bayaz's voice mumbling away, lecturing his apprentice about something or other. Logan was good and glad the first of the Magi was awake again, even if he did look older and seem grimmer than ever. At least now Logan didn't have to decide what to do. That had never worked out too well for anyone concerned. A clear night at last, sang Brother Longfoot as he ducked under the lintel, pointing upwards with huge smugness. A perfect sky for navigation. The stars shine clearly for the first time in 10 days, and I do declare we are not a stride out from our chosen course. Not a foot. I have not led us wrong, my friends. No, That would not have been my way at all. 40 miles to Alcus, as I reckon it, just as I told you. No congratulations were forthcoming. Bayaz and Quay were deep in their ill-tempered muttering. Luthar was holding up the blade of his short sword and trying to find an angle where he could see his reflection. Ferro was frowning in her corner. Longfoot sighed and squatted down beside the fire. Porridge again, he muttered, peering into the pot and wrinkling up his nose. Afraid so? Ah, well, the tribulations of the road, my friend. There would be no glory in travel without the hardship, said Lodgen. He could have managed with a lot less glory if it meant a decent dinner. He prodded unhappily at the bubbling mush with a spoon. Longfoot leaned over to mutter under his breath. It would seem our illustrious employer is having some further troubles with his apprentice. Bayaz's lecture was growing steadily louder and more bad-tempered. Being handy with a pan is all very well, but the practice of magic is still your first vocation. There has been a distinct change in your attitude of late. A certain watchfulness and disobedience. I'm beginning to suspect that you may prove a disappointing pupil. And were you always a fine pupil? We all make mistakes. It is a master's place to try to stop his students making the same ones. Then perhaps you should tell me the history of your mistakes. I might learn to be a better student. Master and apprentice glared at each other over the fire. Lodgen did not like the look of Bayaz's frown. He had seen such looks before on the first of the Magi, and the outcome had never been good. He couldn't understand why Quay had shifted from abject obedience to sullen opposition in the space of a few weeks. But it wasn't making anyone's life easier. Lodgen pretended to be fascinated by the porridge, half expecting to be suddenly deafened by the roar of searing flame. But when sound came, it was only Bayaz's voice, and speaking softly. Very well, Master Quay. There is some sense in your request, for once. Let us talk of my mistakes. An expansive subject indeed. Where to start? At the beginning? Ventured his apprentice. Where else should a man ever start? The Magus gave a sour grunt. Long ago then, in the old time. He paused for a moment and stared into the flames, the light shifting over his hollow face. I was Juven's first apprentice, but soon after starting my education, my master took a second, a boy from the south. His name was Khalul. Ferro looked up suddenly, frowning from the shadows. From the beginning, the two of us could never agree. We both were far too proud, and jealous of each other's talents, and envious of any mark of favor the other earned from our master. Our rivalry persisted, even as the years passed and Juvens took more apprentices, 12 in all. In the beginning, it drove us to be better pupils, more diligent, more devoted. But after the horror of the war with Glustrad, many things were changed. Lodgen gathered up the bowls and started spooning steaming slop out into them, making sure to keep one ear on Bayaz's talk. Our rivalry became a feud, and our feud became a hatred. Perhaps, left to ourselves, we would have killed each other. Perhaps the world would be a happier place if we had, but Juvens interposed. He sent me to the far north and Khalul to the south, to two of the great libraries he had built long years before. He sent us there to study, separately and alone, until our tempers cooled. He thought the high mountains, and the wide sea, and the whole breadth of the circle of the world would put an end to our feud, but he misjudged us. Rather, we each raged in our exile, and blamed the other for it, and plotted our petty revenges. Lodgen shared out the food, such as it was, while Bayaz glared at Quay from under his heavy brows. If I had only had the good sense to listen to my master then, but I was young, and headstrong, and full of pride. I burned to make myself more powerful than Khalul. I decided, fool that I was, that if Juvens would not teach me, I had to find another master. Slop again, Pink? Grunted Ferro as she pulled her bowl from Lodgen's hand. No need to thank me. He tossed her a spoon, and she snatched it out of the air. Lodgen handed the first of the Magi his bowl. Another master. What other master could you find? Only one, murmured Bayaz. Canedius, the master maker. He turned his spoon over and over thoughtfully in his hand. I went to his house, and I knelt before him, and I begged to learn at his feet. He refused me, of course, as he refused everyone at first. But I was stubborn, and in time he relented, and agreed to teach me. And so you lived in the house of the Maker, murmured Quay. Logan shivered as he hunched down over his own bowl. His one brief visit to the place still gave him nightmares. My skill in high art made me useful to my new master, but Canidius was far more jealous of his secrets than ever Juvens had been, and he worked me as hard as slave at his forges, and taught me only such scraps as I needed to serve him. I grew bitter, and when the maker left to seek out materials for his works, my curiosity and my ambition and my thirst for knowledge drove me to stray into parts of his house where he had forbidden me to tread, and there I found his best-guarded secret. He paused. What was it? Prompted Longfoot. Spoon frozen halfway to his mouth. His daughter, Ptolemy, whispered Quay. In a hiss barely audible, Bayaz nodded, and one corner of his mouth curled upwards, as though he remembered something good. She was unlike any other. She had never left the maker's house, had never spoken to anyone besides her father. She helped him with certain tasks, I learned. She handled certain materials that only the maker's own blood could touch. That, I believe, is why he fathered her in the first place. She was beautiful beyond compare. Bayaz's face twitched, and he looked down at the ground with a sour smile. Oh, so she seems to me in memory. That was good, said Luther, licking his fingers and setting down his empty bowl. He'd become a great deal less picky with his food lately. Logan reckoned a few weeks of not being able to chew was sure to do that to a man. There any more? He asked hopefully. Take mine, hissed Quay, thrusting his bowl at Luther. His face was deathly cold, his eyes 2 points of light in the shadows as he glared across at his master. Go on. Bayaz looked up. Ptolemy fascinated me, and I her. It seems strange to say, but I was young then, and full of fire, and still had as fine a head of hair as Captain Luther. He ran one hissing palm over his bald scalp, then shrugged his shoulders. He looked at each of them in turn, as though daring them to laugh, but Logan was too busy sucking salty porridge from his teeth, and no one else so much as smiled. She told me of the tasks her father gave her, and I began, dimly, to understand. He had gathered from far and wide some fragments of material from the world below, left over from the time when demons still walked our earth. He was trying to tap the power of these splinters, to incorporate them into his machines. He was tampering with those forces forbidden by the first law, and had already had some success. Logan shifted uncomfortably. He remembered the thing he had seen in the maker's house, lying in the wet on a block of white stone, strange and fascinating. The divider, Bayaz had called it. 2 edges, one here, one on the other side. He had no appetite now, and he shoved his bowl down by the fire, half finished. I was horrified, continued Bayaz. I had seen the ruin that Glokta had brought upon the world, and I resolved to go to Juvens and tell him everything, but I feared to leave Ptolemy behind, and she would not leave all she knew. So I delayed, and Canidius returned unexpected, and found us together. His fury was, and Bayaz winced as though the memory alone was painful, impossible to describe. His house shook with it, rang with it, burned with it. I was lucky to escape with my life, and fled to seek sanctuary with my old master. Ferro snorted. He was the forgiving type then. Fortunately for me, Juvens would not turn me away despite my betrayal, especially once I told him of his brother's attempts to break the first law. The maker came in great wrath, demanding justice for the violation of his daughter, the theft of his secrets. Juvens refused. He demanded to know what experiments Canidius had been undertaking. The brothers fought, and I fled. The sky was lit with the fury of their battle. I returned to find my master dead, his brother gone. I swore vengeance. I gathered the Magi from across the world, and we made war on the Maker, all of us, except for Kalul. Why not him? Growled Ferro. He said that I could not be trusted, that my folly had caused the war. All too true, surely, muttered Quay. Perhaps in part. But he made far worse accusations also. He and his cursed apprentice, Mammon. Lies, he hissed at the fire. All lies, and the rest of the Magi were not deceived. So Kalul left the order, and returned to the south, and sought for power elsewhere. And he found it. By doing as Glokta had done, and damning himself. By breaking the second law, and eating the flesh of men. Only 11 of us went to fight Canidius, and only 9 of us returned. Bayaz took a long breath, and gave a long sigh. So, Master Quay, there is the story of my mistakes laid bare. You could say they were the cause of my master's death, of the schism in the Order of Magi. You could say that is why we are now heading westwards, into the ruins of the past. You could say that is why Captain Luther has suffered a broken jaw. The seeds of the past bear fruit in the present, muttered Lodgen to himself. So they do, said Bayaz. So they do, and sour fruit indeed. And sour fruit indeed. Will you learn from my mistakes, Master Quay, as I have, and pay some attention to your master? Of course, said the apprentice, though Lodgen wondered if there was a hint of irony in his voice. I will obey in all things. You would be wise to. If I had obeyed Juvens, perhaps I would not have this. Bayaz undid the top 2 buttons of his shirt and pulled his collar to one side. The firelight flickered on a faded scar from the base of the old man's neck down towards his shoulder. The Maker himself gave it to me. Another inch and it would have been my death. He rubbed sourly at it all those years ago, and it still aches from time to time. The pain it has given me over the slow years, so you see, Master Luther, although you bear a mark, it could be worse. Longfoot cleared his throat. That is quite an injury, of course. But I believe I can do better. He took hold of his dirty trouser leg and pulled it right up to his groin, turning his sinewy thigh towards the firelight. There was an ugly mass of puckered gray scar flesh almost all the way round his leg. Even Lodgen had to admit to being impressed. What the hell did that? Asked Luther, looking slightly queasy. Longfoot smiled. Many years ago, when I was yet a young man, I was shipwrecked in a storm off the coast of Soljuk. 9 times in all God has seen fit to dump me into his cold ocean in bad weather. Luckily, I have always been truly blessed as a swimmer. Unluckily, on this occasion, some manner of great fish took me for its next meal. A fish, muttered Ferro. Indeed. A most huge and aggressive fish, with a jaw wide as a doorway and teeth like knives. Fortunately, a sharp blow on the nose, and he chopped at the air with his hand, caused it to release me, and a fortuitous current washed me up on shore. I was doubly blessed to find a sympathetic lady among the natives, who allowed me to recuperate in her abode, for the people of Soljuk are generally most suspicious of outsiders, he sighed happily. That is how I came to learn their language. A highly spiritual people. God has favored me, truly. There was a silence. I bet you can do better. Luther was grinning across at Lodgen. I got bitten by a mean sheep once, but it didn't leave much of a mark. What about the finger? This, he stared at the familiar stub, waggling it back and forward. What about it? How did you lose it? Hearing about Bayaz's mistakes was one thing, but he wasn't that keen to delve into his own. The dead knew he'd made some bad ones. Still, they were all looking now. He had to say something. I lost it in a battle. Outside a place called Carlion. I was young back then, and full of fire myself. It was my stupid fashion to go charging into the thick of the fighting. That time, when I came out, the finger was gone. Heat of the moment, eh? Asked Bayaz. Something like that. He frowned and rubbed gently at the stump. Strange thing. For a long time after it was gone, I could still feel it itching, right in the tip. Drove me mad. How can you scratch a finger that's not there? Did it hurt? Asked Luther, like a bastard, to begin with. But not half as much as some others I've had. Like what? That needed some thinking about. Lodgen scratched at his face and turned over all the hours, and days and weeks he'd spent injured and bloody and screaming, limping around or trying to cut his meat with his hands all bandaged up. I got a good sword cut across my face one time, he said, feeling the notch Tull Duru had made in his ear, blowed like anything. Nearly got my eye poked out with an arrow, rubbing at the crescent scar under his brow. Took hours to dig out all the splinters. Then I had a bloody great rock dropped on me at the siege of Uefrith. First day as well. He rubbed the back of his head and felt the lumpy ridges under his hair. Broke my skull, and my shoulder too. Nasty, said Bayaz. My own fault. That's what you get when you try and tear a city wall down with your bare hands. Luther stared at him, and he shrugged. Didn't work. Like I said, I was hot-headed in my youth. I'm only surprised you didn't try and chew through it. Most likely that would have been my next move. Just as well they dropped a rock on me. At least I've still got my teeth. Spent 2 months squealing on my back while they laid siege to the city. I only just healed in time for the fight with 3 trees, when I got the whole lot broken again, and more besides." Lodgen winced at the memory, curling up the fingers of his right hand and straightening them out, remembering the pain of it, all smashed up. Now that really did hurt, not as much as this though, and he dug his hand under his belt and pulled his shirt up. They all peered across the fire to see what he was pointing at. A small scar, really just under his bottom rib, in the hollow beside his stomach. "Doesn't look like much," said Luther. Lodgen shuffled round to show them his back. "There's the rest of it," he said, jerking his thumb at what he knew was a much bigger mark beside his backbone. There was a long silence while they took that in. "Right through," murmured Longfoot. "Right through with a spear. In a duel with a man called Hardinggrim. Damn lucky to live. And that's a fact." "If it was in a duel," murmured Bayaz, "how did you come out alive?" Lodgen licked his lips. His mouth tasted bitter. "I beat him with a spear through you." "I didn't know about it until afterwards." Longfoot and Luther frowned at each other. "That would seem a difficult detail to overlook," said the navigator. "You'd think so. You'd think so." Lodgen hesitated, trying to think of a good way to put it, but there was no good way. "There are times, well, I don't really know what I'm doing." A long pause. "How do you mean?" asked Bayaz, and Lodgen winced. All the fragile trust he'd built over the last few weeks was in danger of crumbling round his ears, but he didn't see any choice. He'd never been much of a liar. "When I was 14, I think I argued with a friend. Can't even remember what about. I remember being angry. I remember he hit me. Then I was looking at my hands, and he looked down at them now, pale in the darkness. I'd strangled him. Good and dead. I didn't remember doing it. But there was only me there, and I had his blood under my nails. I dragged him up some rocks, and I threw him off onto his head, and I said he fell out of a tree and died, and everyone believed me." His mother cried, and so on. But what could I do? That was the first time it happened. Lodgen felt the eyes of the group all fixed on him. Few years later, I nearly killed my father. Stabbed him while we were eating. Don't know why. Don't know why at all. He healed, luckily. He felt Longfoot easing nervously away, and he hardly blamed him. That was when the Shanka started coming more often, so my father sent me south over the mountains to look for help. So I found Bethad, and he offered me help if I'd fight for him. I was happy to do it, fool that I was. But the fighting went on, and on. The things I did in those wars, the things they told me I did. He took a long breath. "Well, I'd killed friends. You should have seen what I did to enemies. To begin with, I enjoyed it. I loved to sit at the top of the fire, to look at men and see their fear, to have no man dare to meet my eye. But it got worse and worse. There came one winter that I didn't know who I was, or what I was doing most of the time. Sometimes I'd see it happening, but I couldn't change it. No one knew who I'd kill next. They were all shitting themselves, even Bethad, and no one more scared of me than I was. They all sat for a while in gaping silence. The ruined building had been seeming like some kind of comfort after all that dead and empty space on the plain, but it didn't anymore. The empty windows yawned like wounds. The empty doorways gaped like graves. The silence dragged on, and then Longfoot cleared his throat. "So, for the sake of argument, do you think it's possible that, perhaps without intending to, you might kill one of us? It's more likely I'd kill all of you than one." Bayaz was frowning. "Forgive me if I feel less than entirely reassured. I wish at least that you had mentioned this earlier," snapped Longfoot. "It is the type of information a traveling companion should share." "I hardly think that." "Leave him be," growled Ferro. "But we need to know." "Shut your mouth, stargazing fool. You're all a long way from perfect." She scowled over at Longfoot. "Some of you make a lot of words and are nowhere near when the trouble starts." She frowned at Luther. "Some of you are a lot less use than you think you are." She glared at Bayaz. "And some of you keep a lot of secrets, then fall asleep at bad times, and leave the rest of us stranded in the middle of nowhere. So he's a killer. So fucking what? Suited you well enough when the killing needed doing. I only wanted to—" "Shut your mouth," I said. Longfoot blinked for a moment, then did as he was told. Lodgen stared across the fire at Ferro. The very last place he'd ever have hoped to get a good word. Out of all of them, only she'd seen it happen. Only she knew what he really meant. And still, she'd spoken up for him. She saw him looking, and she scowled and shrank back into her corner. But that didn't change anything. He felt himself smile. What about you, then? Bayaz was looking at Ferro as well, touching one finger to his lip as though thinking, what about me? You say you don't like secrets. We have all spoken of our scars. I bored the group with my old stories, and the bloody nine thrilled us with his. The magus tapped his bony face, full of hard shadows from the fire. How did you get yours? A pause. I bet you made whoever gave you that suffer, eh? Said Luther, a trace of laughter in his voice. Longfoot started to chuckle. Oh, indeed. I dare say he came to a sharp end. I dread to think of the... I did it, said Ferro. Such laughter as there was sputtered and died. The smiles faded as they took that in. Eh, said Lodgen. What pink, you fucking deaf? I did it to myself. Why? Ha! She barked, glaring at him across the fire. You don't know what it is to be owned. When I was 12 years old, I was sold to a man called Sussman. And she spat on the ground and snarled something in her own tongue. Lodgen didn't reckon it was a compliment. He owned a place where girls were trained, then sold on at a profit. Trained to do what? Asked Luther. What do you think, fool? To fuck. Ah, he squeaked, swallowing and looking at the ground again. 2 years I was there. 2 years before I stole a knife. I did not know then how to kill. So I hurt my owner the best way I could. I cut myself, right to the bone. By the time they got the blade away from me, I had cut my price down to a quarter. She grinned fiercely at the fire as if it had been her proudest day. You should have heard him squeal. Bastard! Lodgen stared. Longfoot gaped. Even the first of the Magi looked shocked. You scarred yourself? What of it? Silence again. The wind blew up and swirled around inside the ruin, hissing in the chinks between the stones and making the flames flicker and dance. No one had much left to say after that. Chapter 33. Furious. The snow drifted down, white specks swirling in the empty air beyond the cliff's edge, turning the green pines, the black rocks, the brown river below into gray ghosts. Wes could hardly believe that as a child he had looked forward to the coming of snow every year, that he had been delighted to wake up and see the world coated in white, that it could have held a mystery and a wonder and a joy. Now the sight of the flakes settling on Cathal's hair, on Ladisl's coat, on West's own filthy trouser leg, filled him with horror. More gripping cold, more chafing wet, more crushing effort to move. He rubbed his pale hands together, sniffed and frowned up at the sky, willing in himself not to slide into misery. Have to make the best of things, he whispered, the words croaking in his raw throat and smoking thick in the cold. Have to. He thought of warm summer in the Agrient, blossom blowing from the trees in the squares, birds twittering on the shoulders of smiling statues, sunlight pouring through leafy branches in the park. It did not help. He sniffed back runny snot, tried yet again to worm his hands up into his uniform sleeves, but they were never quite long enough. He gripped the frayed hems with his pale fingers. Would he ever be warm again? He felt Pike's hand on his shoulder. Something's up, murmured the convict. He pointed at the Northmen, squatting in a group, muttering urgently to each other. West stared wearily over at them. He had only just got nearly comfortable, and it was difficult to take an interest in anything beyond his own pain. He slowly unfolded his aching legs, heard his cold knees click as he got up, shook himself, tried to slap the tiredness out of his body. He started shuffling towards the Northmen, bent over like an old man, arms wrapped round himself for warmth. Before he got there, the meeting had already broken up, another decision made without any need for his opinion. 3 trees strode towards him, utterly unaffected by the falling snow. The dogman spotted some of Bethed's scouts, he grunted, pointing through the trees. Just down the rise there, right in by the stream, near those falls. Lucky he caught them. They could just as easily have caught us, and we'd most likely all be dead by now. How many? A dozen, he thinks. Getting round 'em could be risky. West frowned. rocking his weight from one foot back to the other, trying to keep the blood moving. Surely fighting them would be riskier still. Maybe not. If we get the jump on them, our chances ain't bad. They've got food, weapons, he looked west, up and down, and clothes, all kinds of gear that we could use. We're just past the knuckle of winter now. We keep heading north. It ain't going to get any warmer. It's decided. We're fighting. A dozen's lone odds, so we'll need every man. Your mate Pike there looks like he can swing an axe without worrying too much on the results. You'd best get him ready and all. He nodded at Ladisla, hunched up on the ground. The girls should stay out, but not the prince. It's too dangerous. 3 Trees narrowed his eyes. You're damn right it's dangerous. That's why every man should share the risk. West leaned in close, doing his best to sound persuasive with his cracked lips as tough and thick as a pair of overcooked sausages. He'd only make the risk greater for everyone. We both know it. The prince peered back at them suspiciously, trying to guess what they were talking about. He'd be about as much use in a fight as a sack over your head. The old Northman snorted. Most likely you're right there. He took a deep breath and frowned, taking some time to think about it. All right, it ain't usual, but all right. He stays, him and the girl. The rest of us fight, and that means you too. West nodded. Each man has to do his part, however little he might relish the prospect. Fair enough. The rest of us fight. And he stumbled back over to tell the others. Back home in the bright gardens of the Agrient, Crown Prince Ladisla would never have been recognized. The dandies, the courtiers, the Hangerson who usually clung to his every word, would most likely have stepped over him, holding their noses. The coat West had given him was coming apart at the seams, worn through at the elbows, crusted with mud. Beneath it, his spotless white uniform had gradually darkened to the color of filth. A few tatters of gold braid still hung from it, like a glorious bouquet of flowers rotted down to the greasy stalks. His hair was a tangled thatch. He had developed a patchy growth of ginger beard, and a rash of hair between his brows implied that in happier days he had spent a great deal of time plucking them. The only man within 100 miles in a sorrier condition was probably West himself. What's to do? Mumbled the prince as West dropped down beside him. There are some of Bethed's scouts down near the river, your highness. We have to fight. The prince nodded. I will need a weapon of some. I must ask you to stay behind. Colonel West, I feel that I should be. You would be a great asset, your highness, but I am afraid it is quite out of the question. You are the heir to the throne. We cannot afford to put you in harm's way. Ladisla did his best to look disappointed, but West could almost taste his relief. Very well, if you're sure. Absolutely, West looked at Cathal. The two of you should stay here. We'll be back soon. With luck. He almost winced at the last part. Luck had been decidedly thin on the ground lately. Keep out of sight, and keep quiet. She grinned back at him. Don't worry. I'll make sure he doesn't hurt himself. Ladisla glowered sideways, fists clenched with impotent anger. It seemed he was getting no better at dealing with her constant jibes. No doubt being flattered and obeyed your entire life was poor preparation for being made a fool of in awful conditions. West wondered for a moment if he was making a mistake leaving them alone, but it was hardly as though he had any choice. They were well out of the way up here. They should be safe, a lot safer than him anyway. They squatted down on their haunches, a ring of scarred and dirty faces, hard expressions, ragged hair. 3 Trees, his craggy features creased with deep lines. Black Dow with his missing ear and his savage grin. Tolduru, his heavy brows drawn in. Grim, looking as careless as a stone. The dogman, bright eyes narrowed, breath steaming from his sharp nose. Pike, with a deep frown across those few parts of his burned face that were capable of movement. 6 of the hardest-looking men in the world, and West. He swallowed. Every man has to do his part. 3 Trees was scratching a crude map in the hard soil with a stick. All right, lads, they're tucked in down here near the river. A dozen, maybe more. Here's how we'll get it done. Grim, up on the left. Dogman on the right. Usual drill. Done, Chief, said the dogman. Grim nodded. Meh. Toll and Pike'll come at 'em from this side, hand to hand. Hope to surprise 'em. Don't shoot any of us, lads? The dogman grinned. If you keep well clear of the arrows, you'll be fine. I'll keep that in mind. Down west, you'll get across the river and wait by the falls there. Come up behind them. The stick scratched a hard groove into the earth, and West felt the lump of worry swelling in his throat. Noise of the water should keep you out of notice. Go when you see me chuck a stone over into the pool, you hear me? The stone coming over. That's the signal. Course it is, Chief, grunted Dow. West suddenly realized that Three Trees was glaring right at him. You hearing this, boy? Yes, of course, he muttered, tongue clumsy with cold and growing fear. When the stone comes over, we go, Chief. All right, and the lot of you keep your eyes open. There could be others near. Bethard's got scouts all over the country. Anyone still guessing at what to do? They all shook their heads. Good. Then don't go blaming me if you get yourself killed. Three Trees stood up and the others followed him. They made their last few preparations, loosening blades and sheaths, pulling at bowstrings, tightening buckles. There wasn't much for West to prepare. A heavy stolen sword pushed through a weathered belt. And that was it. He felt an utter fool in amongst this company. He wondered how many people they had killed between them. He would not have been surprised if it had been a whole town full, with enough left over for an outlying village or two. Even Pike looked more than ready to commit careless murder. West had to remind himself that he had not the slightest idea why the man had been convicted to a penal colony in the first place. Looking at him now, running a thoughtful thumb down the edge of his heavy axe, eyes hard in that dead, burned face, it was not difficult to imagine. West stared at his hands. They were trembling, and not just from the cold. He grabbed one with the other and squeezed them tight. He looked up to see the dogman grinning at him. Got to have fear to have courage, he said, then turned and followed Three Trees and the others into the trees. Black Dow's harsh voice hacked at West from behind. You're with me, killer. Try and keep up. He spat on the frozen ground, then turned and set off towards the river. West took one last look back towards the others. Cathal nodded to him, once. And he nodded back, then he turned and followed Dow, ducking through the trees in silence, all coated with glittering, dripping ice, while the hissing of the waterfall grew louder and louder in his ears. Three Trees' plan was starting to seem rather short on details. Once we get across the stream and we get the signal, what do we do? Kill, grunted Dow over his shoulder. That answer, useless though it was, sent a sudden stab of panic through West's guts. Should I go left or right? Whichever you like, long as you stay out of my way. Where will you be going? Wherever the killing is. West wished he had never spoken as he stepped gingerly out onto the bank. He could see the falls just upstream, a wall of dark rock and rushing white water between the black tree trunks, throwing freezing mist and noise into the air. The river here was no more than 4 strides across, but the water flooded past, quick and dark, frothing round the wet stones at its edges. Dow held his sword, an axe up high, waded out steadily, up to his waist in the middle, then crept up onto the far bank, pressing himself dripping against the rocks. He looked round, frowned to see West so far behind, jerked his hand angrily for him to follow. West fumbled out his own sword and lifted it up, held a deep breath, and stepped into the stream. The water flooded into his boot and round his calf. It felt as if his leg had been suddenly clamped in ice. He took a step forward, and his other leg vanished up to the thigh. His eyes bulged. His breath came in snorts, but there could be no turning back. He took one more step. His boots slipped on the mossy stones on the bed of the stream, and he slid helplessly in up to his armpits. He would have screamed if the freezing water had not hammered the air out of his lungs. He floundered forward, half stumbling, half swimming, teeth gritted with panic, sloshed up onto the far bank, breath hissing in shallow, desperate gasps. He staggered up and leaned against the stones behind Dow, his skin numb and prickling. The Northman smirked at him. "You look cold, boy." "I'm fine," spluttered West through chattering teeth. He had never been so cold in his life. "I'll do my part. You'll do your what? I'll not have you fighting, cold boy. You'll get us both killed." "Don't worry up." Dow's open hand slapped him hard across the face. The shock of it was almost worse than the pain. West gawped, dropping his blade in the mud, one hand jerking up instinctively to his stinging cheek. "What the? Use it," hissed the Northman at him. "It belongs to you." West was just opening his mouth when Dow's other hand smacked into it and sent him staggering against the rocks. blood dribbling from his lip and onto the wet earth. His head singing, "It's yours! Own it, you fucking!" The rest was nothing more than a mindless growl as West's hands closed round Dow's neck, squeezing, clawing, snarling like an animal, teeth bared and mindless. The blood surged round his body, the hunger and the pain, and the frustration of the endless freezing march spilling out of him all at once. But Black Dow was twice as strong as West, however angry he was. "Use it," he growled as he peeled West's hands away and crushed him back against the rocks. "You hot yet?" Something flashed overhead and splashed into the water beside them. Dow gave him a parting shove, then sprang away, charging up the bank with a roar. West struggled after him, clawing the heavy sword up out of the mud and lifting it high, the blood pulsing in his head, howling meaningless sounds at the top of his lungs. The muddy ground sped by underneath him. He crashed through bushes and rotten wood into the open. He saw Dow hack a gawping Northman down with his axe. Dark blood leapt into the air, black spots against the tangle of branches and white sky. Trees and rocks and shaggy men jolted and wobbled, his own breath roaring in his ears like a storm. Someone loomed up, and he swung the sword at them, felt it bite. Blood spattered into West's face, and he reeled and spat, and blinked, slid onto his side and scrambled up. His head was full of wailing and crying, clashing metal and cracking bone. Chop, hack, snarl. Someone staggered near him, clutching at an arrow in his chest. West's sword split his skull open down to his mouth. The corpse jerked, twisting the blade from his hand. He stumbled in the dirt, half fell, lashed out at a passing body with his fist. Something crashed into him and flung him back against a tree, knocking the air from his lungs in a breathy wheeze. Someone had him fast around the chest, pinning his arms, trying to crush the life out of him. West craned forward and sank his teeth into the man's lip, felt them meet in the middle. He screamed and punched, but West hardly felt the blows. He spat out the flap of flesh and butted him in the face. The man squirmed and yelped, blood leaking out of his torn mouth. West clamped his teeth round his nose, growling like a mad dog. "Bite, bite, bite!" His mouth filled with blood. He could hear screaming in his ears, but all that mattered was to squeeze his jaws together, tighter and tighter. He twisted his head away, and the man reeled back, clutching at his face. An arrow came out of nowhere and thudded into his ribs. He fell to his knees. West dived on him, grabbed hold of his tangled hair with clutching hands and smashed his face into the ground. Again and again. "It's done." West's hands jerked back, grasping claws full of blood and ripped out hair. He struggled up, gasping, eyes bulging. Everything was still. The world had stopped reeling. Spots of snow filtered gently down into the clearing, settling across the wet earth, the scattered gear, the stretched-out bodies, and the men still standing. Tull was not far away, staring at. 3 Trees was behind, sword in hand. Pike's pink slab of a face had something close to a wince on it, one bloody fist squeezed round his arm. They were all looking at him. Dow raised his hand, pointing at West. He tipped his head back and started to laugh. "You bit him! You bit his fucking nose off! I knew you were a mad bastard." West stared at them. The thumping in his head was starting to subside. "What?" he muttered. There was blood all over him. He wiped his mouth. Salty. He looked at the nearest corpse, face down on the earth. Blood was trickling from underneath its head, running down the slope and pooling around West's boot. He remembered something. A sudden cramp in his guts bent him over, spitting pink onto the ground, empty stomach heaving. "Furious!" shouted Dow. "That's what Grim had already stepped out of the bushes, bow over his shoulder, and was squatting down, dragging a bloody fur from one of the corpses. "Good coat," he muttered to himself. West watched them all pick over the campsite, bent over, sick and utterly spent. He listened to Dow laughing. "Furious," cackled his harsh voice. "That's what I'll call you. They got arrows over here." The dogman pulled something out of one of the packs on the ground and grinned. "And cheese. Bit dusty." He picked some mold off the wedge of yellow with his dirty fingers, bit into it, and grinned. "Still good, though." "Lots of good stuff," nodded 3 Trees, starting to smile himself. "And we're all still going, more or less. Good day's work, lads. He slapped Tull on the back. We'd best head on north quick before these lot are missed. Let's get what there is fast and pick up those other two. West's mind was only just starting to move again. The others. All right, said Three Trees. You and Dow check on them furious. He turned away with half a smile. West lurched off through the trees the way he'd come, slipping and sliding in his haste, blood pulsing again. Protect the prince, he muttered to himself. He waded across the stream almost without noticing the cold, struggled onto the far bank and back uphill, hurrying towards the cliff where they had left the others. He heard a woman's scream, quickly cut off, a man's voice growling. Horror crept through every part of his body. Bethod's men had found them. It might already be too late. He urged his burning legs on up the slope, stumbling and sliding in the mud. Had to protect the prince. The air burned in his throat, but he forced himself on, fingers clutching at the tree trunks, scrabbling at the loose twigs and needles on the frosty ground. He burst out into the open space beside the cliff, breathing hard, the bloody sword gripped tight in his fist. Two figures struggled on the ground. Cathal was underneath, wriggling on her back, kicking and clawing at someone on top of her. The man had managed to drag her trousers down below her knees, and now he was fiddling with his own belt while he struggled to hold his other hand across her mouth. West took a step forward, raising the sword high, and the man's head snapped round. West blinked. The would-be rapist was none other than Crown Prince Ladisla himself. When he saw West, he stumbled up and took a step back. He had a slightly sheepish expression, almost a grin like a schoolboy caught stealing a pie from the kitchen. "Sorry," he said. "I thought you'd be longer." West stared at him, hardly able to understand what was happening. "Longer? You fucking bastard!" screamed Cathal, scrambling back and dragging her trousers up. "I'll fucking kill you!" Ladisla touched his lip. "She bit me. Look!" He held his bloody fingertips out as though they were proof of an outrage perpetrated against him. West found himself moving forwards. The prince must have seen something in his face, because he took a step away, holding up one hand while he held up his trousers with the other. "Now hold on, West, just." There was no towering rage, no temporary blindness, no limbs moving by themselves, not the slightest trace of a headache. There was no anger at all. West had never in his life felt so calm, so sober, so sure of himself. He chose to do it. His right arm jerked out and his open palm thumped against Ladisla's chest. The Crown Prince gave a gentle gasp as he stumbled sharply backwards. His left foot twisted in the mud. He put down his right foot, but there was no ground behind him. His brows went up, his mouth and eyes opened with silent shock. The heir to the throne of the Union fell away from West, his hands clutching vainly, turning slowly to his side in the air, and he was gone. There was a short, breathy cry, a thumping sound, and another, a long clattering of stones, then silence. West stood there, blinking. He turned to look at Cathal. She was frozen, a couple of strides away, eyes gawping wide open. You, I know." It hardly sounded like his voice. He edged to the very brink of the cliff and peered over. Ladisla's corpse lay drooped face down over the rocks far below. West's ragged coat spread out behind him, trousers round his ankles, one knee bent back the wrong way, a ring of dark blood spreading out across the stones around his broken head. Never had anyone looked more dead. West swallowed. He had done that. Him. He had killed the heir to the throne. He had murdered him in cold blood. He was a criminal. He was a traitor. He was a monster. And he almost wanted to laugh. The sunny Agrient, where loyalty and deference were given without question, where commoners did what their betters told them, where the killing of other people was simply not the done thing. All this was very far away. Monster he might be, but out here in the frozen wilderness of Angland the rules were different. Monsters were in the majority. He felt a hand clap him heavily on the shoulder. He looked up to see Black Dow's earless head beside him, peering down. The Northman whistled softly through pursed lips. "Well, that's the end of that, I reckon. You know what, Furious?" And he grinned sideways at West. "I'm getting to like you, boy." Chapter 34. To the Last Man. To Sand Dan Glokta, superior of Dagaska, and for his eyes alone. It is clear that in spite of your efforts, Dagaska cannot remain in Union hands for much longer. I therefore order you to leave immediately and present yourself to me. The docks may have been lost, but you should have no trouble slipping away by night in a small boat. A ship will be waiting for you down the coast. You will confer overall command on General Visbrook, as the only Union member of Dagaska's ruling council left alive in the city. It need hardly be said that the orders of the closed council to the defenders of Dagaska remain the same. To fight to the last man. Sult Archlector of His Majesty's Inquisition. General Visbrook slowly lowered the letter, his jaws locked tight together. Are we to understand, then, Superior, that you are leaving us? His voice was cracking slightly. With panic, with fear, with anger. Who could blame him for any one of them? The room was much the same as it had been the first day Glokta arrived in the city. The superb mosaics, the masterful carvings, the polished table, all shining in the early morning sun streaming through the tall windows. The ruling council itself, however, is sadly reduced. Visbrook, his jowls bulging over the stiff collar of his embroidered jacket, and Hadish Kadia, slumped tiredly in his chair, were all that remained. Nikimo Koska stood apart, leaning against the wall near the window, and picking his fingernails. Glokta took a deep breath. The Archlector wants me to explain myself. Visbrook gave a squeaky chuckle. For some reason, the image of rats fleeing a burning house springs to mind. An apt metaphor, if the rats are fleeing the flames to fling themselves into a mincing machine. Come now, General. Koska let his head roll back against the wall, a faint smile on his lips. The Superior didn't have to come to us with this. He could have stolen away in the night, and no one any the wiser. That's what I'd have done. Allow me to have scant regard for what you might have done, sneered Visbrook. Our situation is critical. The land walls are lost, and with them all chance of holding out for long. The slums swarm with Gurkish soldiers. Every night we make sallies from the gates of the upper city. We burn a ram. We kill some sentries while they sleep. But every day they bring up more equipment. Soon perhaps they will have cleared space down among the hovels and assembled their great catapults. Shortly thereafter, one imagines, the upper city will come under sustained fire from incendiaries. He stabbed an arm at the window. They might even reach the citadel from there. This very room may sport a boulder the size of a woodshed as a centerpiece. I am well aware of our position, snapped Glokta. The stench of panic the last few days has grown strong enough almost for the dead to smell it. But the Archlector's orders are most specific. To fight to the last man. No surrender. Visbrook's shoulders slumped. Surrender would do no good in any case. He got up, made a half-hearted attempt to straighten his uniform, then slowly pushed his chair under the table. Glokta almost pitied him at that moment. Probably he is deserving of pity, but I wasted all I had on Karlad Dan Eider, who hardly deserved it at all. Allow me to offer you one piece of advice from a man who's seen the inside of a Gurkish prison. If the city should fall, I strongly recommend that you take your own life rather than be captured. General Visbrook's eyes widened for a moment. Then he looked down the beautiful mosaic floor and swallowed. When he lifted his face, Glokta was surprised to see a bitter smile. This is hardly what I had in mind when I joined the army. Glokta tapped his ruined leg with his cane and gave a twisted grin of his own. I could say the same. What did Stolicus write? The recruiting sergeant sells dreams but delivers nightmares. That would seem appropriate to the case. If it's any comfort, I doubt that my fate will be even as pleasant as yours. A small one. And Visbrook snapped his well-polished heels together and stood to vibrating attention. He remained like that for a moment, frozen, then turned without a word for the door, soles clicking loud against the floor, and dying away in the corridor outside. Glokta looked over at Kadia. Regardless of what I said to the general, I would urge you to surrender the city at the earliest opportunity. Kadia's tired eyes slid up. After all this, now, especially now, perhaps the Emperor will choose to be merciful. In any case, I can see little advantage for you in fighting on. As things stand, there is still something to bargain with. You might be able to get some kind of terms. And that is the comfort you offer? The Emperor's mercy. That's all I have. What did you tell me about a man lost in the desert? Kadia nodded slowly. Whatever the outcome, I would like to thank you. Thank me, you fool? For what? Destroying your city and leaving you to the Emperor's mercy. For treating us with some measure of respect. Glokta snorted. Respect? I thought I simply told you whatever you wanted to hear, in order to get what I needed. Perhaps so, but thanks cost nothing. God go with you. God will not follow where I am going, Glokta muttered, as Kadia shuffled slowly from the room. Casca grinned down his long nose. Back to Adua. Eh, superior? Back, as you say, to Adua? Back, as you say. Back to the House of Questions. Back to Arch-Lector Salt-Dodosh. The thought was hardly a happy one. Perhaps I'll see you there. You think so? More likely you'll be butchered along with all the rest when the city falls. Then you'll miss your opportunity to see me hanged. If I've learned one thing, it's that there's always a chance. Casca grinned as he pushed himself away from the wall and strutted towards the door. One hand rested jauntily on the pommel of his sword. I hate to lose a good employer. I'd hate to be lost, but prepare yourself for the possibility of disappointment. Life is full of them, and the manner of its ending is often the greatest one of all. Well then, if one of us should be disappointed. And Casca bowed in the doorway with a theatrical flourish, the flaking gilt on his once magnificent breastplate glinting in a shaft of morning sunlight. It has been an honor. Glokta sat on the bed, tonguing at his empty gums and rubbing his throbbing leg. He looked around his quarters. Or Davust's quarters. That's where an old wizard terrified me in the middle of the night. That's where I watched the city burn. That's where I was nearly eaten by a 14-year-old girl. Ah, the happy memories. He grimaced as he pushed himself up and limped over to the one box he had brought with him. And this is where I signed a receipt for 1,000,000 marks, advanced by the banking house of Valent and Bolk. He slid the flat leather case that Mothis had given him out of his coat pocket. 500,000 marks in polished stones, barely touched. He felt again the tugging temptation to open it, to dig his hand inside and feel that cool, hard, clicking distillation of wealth between his fingers. He resisted with an effort, bent down with a greater one, pushed some of the folded clothes aside with one hand, and dug the case down under them with the other. Black, 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 and black. I really should get a more varied wardrobe. Going without saying goodbye? Glokta jerked violently up from his stoop, and nearly vomited at a searing spasm through his back. He reached out with one arm and slammed the box lid down just in time to flop onto it before his leg buckled. Vitari was standing in the doorway, frowning over at him. "Damn it," he hissed, blowing spit through the gaps in his teeth with every heaving breath, left leg numb as wood, right leg cramping up with agony. She padded into the room, narrowed eyes sliding left and right, checking that there's no one else here. A private interview, then. His heart was starting to beat fast as she slowly shut the door, and not just from the spasms in his leg. The key rattled in the lock. Just the two of us. How terribly exciting. She paced silently across the carpet, her long black shadow stretching out towards him. "I thought we had a deal," hissed out from behind her mask. "So did I," snapped Glokta, struggling to find a more dignified position. "Then I got a little note from Salt. He wants me back, and I think we can all guess why. Not because of anything I told him." "So you say?" Her eyes narrowed further. Her feet padded closer. "We had a deal. I kept my end. Good for you. You can console yourself with that thought when I'm floating face down in the docks in Adua, and you're stuck here, waiting for the Gurkish to break down the youth." And she was on him, her weight grinding his twisted back into the box, squeezing the air from him in a ragged wheeze. There was a bright flash of metal and the rattle of a chain. Her fingers slid round his neck. "You crippled worm! I should cut your fucking throat right now." Her knee jabbed painfully into his stomach. Cold metal tickled gently at the skin on his neck. Her blue eyes glared into his, flickering back and forth, glistening hard as the stones in the box under his back. My death could be moments away. Easily. He remembered watching her choke the life out of Ider, with as little care as I might squash an ant, and I, poor cripple, just as helpless as one. Perhaps he should have been gibbering with fear, but all he could think was, "When was the last time I had a woman on top of me?" He snorted with laughter. "Don't you know me at all?" he blubbered, half chuckling, half sobbing, eyes watering with a sickening mixture of pain and amusement. "Superior Glokta, pleased to meet you. I don't care a good shit what you do, and you know it. Threats? You'll have to do a sight better than that, you ginger whore." Her eyes bulged with fury. Her shoulder came forwards. Her elbow went back, ready to apply the greatest possible pressure. "Enough to cut my neck through to my twisted spine, I don't doubt." Glokta felt his lips curl back in a sickly grin, wet with spit. Now he heard Vitara's breath snorting behind her mask. Do it. He felt the blade press against his neck, a chilled touch so sharp that he could hardly feel it. "I'm ready." Then she let out a long hiss, lifted the blade high and rammed it into the wood beside his head. She stood up and turned away from him. Glokta closed his eyes and breathed for a moment. Still alive. There was an odd feeling in his throat, relief or disappointment, hard to tell the difference. "Please." It was said so softly that he thought he might have imagined it. Vitari was standing with her back to him, head bent over, fists clenched and trembling. "What, please?" She did say it. "And it hurts her to do it, you can tell." "Please, eh? You think there's any place here for please? Why the hell should I save you, really? You came here to spy for Salt. You've done nothing but get in my way ever since you got here. It's hard to think of anyone I trust less, and I don't trust anyone." She turned back to face him, reached behind her head, took hold of the straps of her mask and pulled it off. There was a sharp tan line underneath, brown round her eyes, her forehead, her neck, white round her mouth, with a pink mark across the bridge of her nose. Her face was far softer, much younger, more ordinary than he had expected. She no longer looked fearsome. She looked scared and desperate. Glokta felt suddenly, ludicrously awkward, as though he had blundered into a room and caught someone naked. He almost had to look away as she kneeled down level with him. "Please." Her eyes looked moist, dewy, her lip trembling as if she was on the very point of weeping. A glimpse at the secret hopes beneath the vicious shell, or just a good act. Glokta felt his eyelid fluttering. "It's not for myself," she almost whispered. "Please. I'm begging you." He rubbed his hand thoughtfully across his neck. When he took it away, there was blood on his fingertip, the faintest brown smear, a nick, a graze. Just a hair's breadth further, and I'd be pumping blood all over the lovely carpet right now. Only a hair's breadth. Lives turn on such chances. Why should I save her? But he knew why. Because I don't save many. He turned painfully round on the box so his back was to her and sat there, kneading at the dead flesh of his left leg. He took a deep breath. "All right," he snapped. "You won't regret it. I regret it already. Damn, but I'm a fool for crying women. And you can carry your own damn luggage." He looked round, raising a finger. But Vitari already had the mask back on. Her eyes were dry, and narrow, and fierce. They looked like eyes that couldn't shed a tear in 100 years. "Don't worry." She jerked on the chain round her wrist, and the cross-shaped blade sprang from the lid of the box and slapped into her waiting palm. "I travel light." Glokta watched the flames reflected in the calm surface of the bay, shifting fragments, red, yellow, sparkling white in the black water. Frost pulled at the oars, smoothly, evenly, his pale face half lit by the flickering fires in the city, expressionless. Severard sat behind him, hunched over, glowering out across the water. Vitari was beyond and in the prow, her head no more than a spiky outline. The blades dipped into the sea and feathered the water with barely a sound. It hardly seemed that the boat moved. Rather, the dark outline of the peninsula slipped slowly away from them into the darkness. "What have I done? Consigned a city full of people to death or slavery for what? For the king's honor, a drooling halfwit who can scarcely control his bowels, let alone a country. For my pride. Ha! I threw it all away long ago, along with my teeth. For Salt's approval. My reward is like to be a rope collar and a long drop." He could just see the darker outline of the rock against the dark night sky, the craggy form of the citadel perched on top of it, perhaps even the slender shapes of the spires of the great temple, all moving off into the past. What could I have done differently? I could have thrown in my lot with Ida and the rest, given the city away to the Gurkish without a fight. Would that have changed anything? Glokta licked sourly at his empty gums. The Emperor would have set about his purges just the same. Sult would have sent for me just as he has done. Little differences, hardly worth commenting on. What did Schickel say? Few indeed are those who get a choice. A chill breeze blew, and Glokta pulled his coat tight around him, folded his arms across his chest, winced as he worked his numb foot back and forward in his boot, trying to make the blood flow. The city was nothing but a dusting of pinprick lights far away. It is just as Iders seed also the Archlector and his like can point at a map and say this dot or that is ours. And after all the efforts, all the sacrifices, all the scheming and plotting and killing, we could not even hold the city. All that pain, for what? There was no reply, of course. Only the calm waves lapping against the side of the boat, the soft creaking of the rowlocks, the soothing slap of the oars on the water. He wanted to feel disgust at himself, guilt at what he had done, pity for all those left behind to gurkish mercy. The way other men might, the way I might have, long ago. But it was hard to feel much of anything beyond the overwhelming tiredness, and the endless, nagging ache up his leg, through his back, into his neck. He winced as he sagged back on his wooden seat, searching as always for a less painful position. There is no need to punish myself after all. Punishment will come soon enough. Chapter 35, Jewel of Cities. At least he could ride now. The splints had come off that morning, and Jezel's sore leg knocked painfully against his horse's flank as it moved. His hand was numb and clumsy on the reins, his arm weak and aching without the dressing. His teeth still throbbed dully with every thump of the hooves on the ruined road. But at least he was out of the cart, and that was something. Small things seemed to make him very happy these days. The others rode in a somber, silent group, grim as mourners at a funeral, and Jezel hardly blamed them. It was a somber sort of place, a plain of dirt, of fissures of bare rock, of sand and stone, empty of life. The sky was a still white nothing, heavy as pale lead, promising rain but never quite delivering. They rode clustered round the cart as though huddling for warmth, the only warm things in 100 miles of cold desert, the only moving things in a place frozen in time, the only living things in a dead country. The road was wide, but the stones were cracked and buckled. In places whole stretches of it had crumbled away, in others flows of mud had covered it entirely. The dead stumps of trees jutted from the bare earth to either side. Bayaz must have seen him looking at them. An avenue of proud oaks lined this road for 20 miles from the city gates. In summer their leaves shimmered and shook in the wind over the plain. Juvens planted them with his own hands in the old time, when the empire was young, long before even I was born. The mutilated stumps were gray and dry, splintered edges still showing the marks of saws. They look as if they were cut down months ago. Many long years, my boy. When Glustrad seized the city, he had them all felled to feed his furnaces. Then why have they not rotted? Even rot is a kind of life. There is no life here. Jezel swallowed and hunched his shoulders, watching the chunks of long dead wood file slowly past like rows of tombstones. I don't like this, he muttered under his breath. You think I do? Bayaz frowned grimly over at him. You think any of us do? Men must sometimes do what they do not like if they are to be remembered. It is through struggle, not ease, that fame and honor are won. It is through conflict, not peace, that wealth and power are gained. Do such things no longer interest you? Yes, muttered Jezel. Yes, muttered Jezel. I suppose, but he was far from sure. He looked out across the sea of dead dirt. There was precious little sign of honor out here, let alone wealth, and it was hard to see where fame would come from. He was already well known to the only 5 people within 100 miles. Besides, he was starting to wonder if a long, poor life in utter obscurity would really be such a terrible thing. Perhaps, when he got home, he would ask R.D. to marry him. He amused himself by imagining her smile when he suggested it. No doubt she would make him squirm, waiting for an answer. No doubt she would keep him dangling. No doubt she would say yes. What, after all, was the worst that could happen? Would his father be angry? Would they be forced to live on his officers' pay? Would his shallow friends and his idiot brothers chuckle at his back to see him so reduced in the world? He almost laughed to think that those had seemed weighty reasons. A life of hard work with the woman he loved beside him. A rented house in an unfashionable part of town, with cheap furniture but a cozy fire. No fame, no power, no wealth, but a warm bed with RD in it, waiting for him. That hardly seemed like such a terrible fate now that he had looked death in the face, when he was living on a bowl of porridge a day and feeling grateful to get it. He was sleeping alone out in the wind and the rain. His grin grew wider, and the feeling of the sore skin stretching across his jaw was almost pleasant. That did not seem like such a bad life at all. The great walls thrust up sheer, scabbed with broken battlements, blistered with shattered towers, scarred with black cracks and slick with wet. A cliff of dark stone, curving away out of sight into the gray drizzle. The bare earth in front of it pooled with brown water, and scattered with toppled blocks as big as coffins. "Ulcus," growled Bayaz, jaw set hard. He had an awful feeling as he looked at that dark gate, a sick feeling, like the one he had when he looked into the open door of the maker's house, as if he was looking into a grave, and possibly his own. All he could think about was turning round and never coming back. His horse nickered softly and took a step away, its breath smoking in the misty rain. The hundreds of long and dangerous miles back to the sea seemed suddenly an easier journey than the few strides to that gate. "Are you sure about this?" he murmured to Bayaz. "Am I sure? No, of course not. I brought us weary leagues across the barren plain on a whim. I spent years planning the journey, and gathered this little group from all across the circle of the world for no reason beyond my own amusement. No harm will be done if we simply toddle back to Caucasus. Am I sure?" He shook his head as he urged his horse towards the yawning gateway. Lodgen shrugged his shoulders. "Only asking." The arch gaped wider and wider, then swallowed them whole. The sound of the horse's hooves echoed down the long tunnel, clattering around them in the darkness. The weight of stone all around pressed in close, and seemed to make it hard to take a breath. Lodgen put his head down, frowning towards the circle of light at the far end as it grew steadily bigger. He glanced sideways and caught Luther's eye, licking his lips nervously in the gloom, wet hair plastered to his face. And then they came out into the open. My, breathed Longfoot. My, colossal buildings rose up on either side of a vast square. The ghosts of tall pillars and high roofs, of towering columns and great walls, all made for giants, loomed from the haze of rain. Lodgen gawped. They all did, a tiny huddled group in that outsized space, like scared sheep in a bare valley, waiting for the wolves to come. Rain hissed on stone high overhead. Fallen water splattered on the slick cobbles, trickled down the crumbling walls, gurgled in the cracks in the road. The thudding of hooves fell muffled. The cartwheels gently croaked and groaned. No other noise. No bustle, no din, no chatter of crowds, no birds calling, no dogs barking, no clatter of trade and commerce. Nothing lived, nothing moved. There were only the great black buildings, stretching far away into the rain, and the ripped clouds crawling across the dark sky above. They rode slowly past the ruins of some fallen temple, a tangled mass of dripping blocks and slabs, sections of its monstrous columns scattered on their sides across the broken paving, fragments from its roof thrown wide, still lying where they fell. Luther's wet face, apart from the pink stain across his chin, was chalky white as he gazed up at the soaring wreckage to either side. "Bloody hell," he muttered. "It is indeed," murmured Longfoot under his breath, "a most impressive sight." "The palaces of the wealthy dead," said Bayaz, "the temples where they prayed to angry gods, the markets where they bought and sold goods and animals and people, where they bought and sold each other, the theaters and the baths and the brothels where they indulged their passions before Glustrad came." He pointed across the square and down the valley of dripping stone beyond. "This is the Colleen Way, the greatest road of the city, and where the greatest citizens had their dwellings. It runs straight through, more or less, from the northern gate to the southern. Now listen to me," he said, turning in his creaking saddle. 3 miles south of the city, there is a high hill, with a temple on its summit, the Saturnine Rock, they called it in the old time. If we should become separated, that is where we will meet." "Why would we be separated?" asked Luther, his eyes wide. "The earth in the city is unquiet and prone to tremble. The buildings are ancient and unstable. I hope that we will pass through without incident, but it would be rash to rely on hope alone. If anything should happen, head south, toward the Satterline Rock. Until then, stay close together." That hardly needed saying. Logan looked over at Ferro as they set off into the city, her black hair spiky, her dark face dewy with wet, frowning up suspiciously at the towering buildings to either side. "If anything should happen," he whispered to her. "Help me out, eh?" She looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "If I can, Pink, good enough. The only thing worse than a city full of people is a city with no people at all." Ferro rode with her bow in one hand, the reins in the other, staring to both sides, peering down the alleys, into the gaping windows and doorways, straining to see round the crumbling corners and over the broken walls. She did not know what she was looking for, but she would be ready. They all felt as she did. She could see it. She watched the fibers of jaw muscle tensing and relaxing, over and over, on the side of Nine Fingers' head as he frowned off into the ruins, his hand never far from the grip of his sword, scored cold metal shining with beads of fate. Moisture. Luther jumped at every noisy, at the crack of a stone under the cartwheels, at the splatter of falling water into a pool, at the snort of one of the horses, his head jerking this way and that, the tip of his tongue licking endlessly at the slot in his lip. Quay sat on the cart, bent over with his wet hair flapping round his gaunt face, pale lips pressed together into a hard line. Ferro watched him snap the reins, saw he was gripping them so tightly that the tendons stood out stark from the backs of his thin hands. Longfoot stared about him at the endless ruins, eyes and mouth hanging slightly open, rivulets of water occasionally streaking through the stubble on his knobbly skull. For once he had nothing to save one small advantage of this place abandoned by God. Bayaz was trying to look confident, but Ferro knew better. She watched his hand tremble when he took it from the reins to rub the water from his thick brows. She watched his mouth work when they stopped at junctions, watched him squinting into the rain, trying to reckon the right course. She saw his worry and his doubt written in his every movement. He knew as well as she did. This place was not safe. Click, clank. It came faint through the rain, like the sound of a hammer on a distant anvil, the sound of weapons being made ready. She stood up in her stirrups, straining to listen. "Do you hear that?" she snapped at Nine Fingers. He paused, squinting off at nothing, listening. Click-clank. He nodded slowly. "I hear it." He slid his sword out from its sheath. "What?" Luther stared around, wild-eyed, fumbling for his own weapons. "There's nothing out there," grumbled Bayaz. She jabbed her palm at them to stop, slid down from her saddle and crept up to the corner of the next building, knocking an arrow to her bow, backsliding across the rough surface of the huge stone blocks. Clank Dick. She could feel Nine Fingers following, moving carefully, a reassuring presence behind her. She slid around the corner onto one knee, peering across an empty square, pocked with pools and strewn with rubble. There was a high tower at the far corner, leaning over to one side, wide windows hanging open at its summit under a tarnished dome. Something was moving in there, slowly. Something dark, rocking back and forth. She almost smiled to have something she could point an arrow at. It was a good feeling, having an enemy. Then she heard hooves and Bayaz rode past, out into the ruined square. "Sssss," she hissed at him. But he ignored her. "You can put your weapons away," he called over his shoulder. "It's nothing but an old bell, clicking in the wind. The city was full of them. You should have heard them pealing out when an emperor was born, or crowned, or married, or welcomed back from a victorious campaign." He started to raise his arms, voice growing louder. The air split with their joyous ringing, and birds rose up from every square and street and roof and filled the sky. He was shouting now, bellowing it out, and the people lined the streets, and they leaned from their windows, and they showered the beloved with flower petals, and cheered until their voices were hoarse. He started to laugh, and he let his arms fall, and high above him the broken bell clicked and clanked in the wind. "Long ago, come on. Quay snapped the reins and the cart trundled off after the magus. Ninfingers shrugged at her and sheathed his sword. Ferro stayed a moment, staring up suspiciously at the stark outline of that leaning tower, dark clouds flowing past above it. Click-clank. Then she followed the others. The statues swam up out of the angry rain, one pair of frozen giants at a time, their faces all worn down by the long years, until everyone was the featureless same. Water trickled over smooth marble, dripped from long beards, from armored skirts, from arms outstretched in threat or blessing, amputated long ago at the wrist, or the elbow, or the shoulder. Some were worked with bronze, huge helmets, swords, scepters, crowns of leaves, all turned chalky green, leaving dirty streaks down the gleaming stone. The statues swam up out of the angry rain, and one pair of giants at a time they vanished into the rain behind, consigned to the mists of history. Emperors, said Bayaz. Hundreds of years of them. Jizal watched the rulers of antiquity file menacingly past, looming over the broken road, his neck aching from looking up, the rain tickling at his face. The sculptures were twice the height or more of the ones in the Agrient, but there was similarity enough to cause a sudden wave of homesickness. Just like to the Kingsway. In Adua, huh? Grunted Bayaz. Where do you think I got the idea? Where do you think I got the idea? Yezel was just absorbing that bizarre comment when he noticed that the statues they were approaching now were the last pair, one tilted over at a worrying angle. Hold up the cart, called Bayaz, raising one wet palm and nudging his horse forward. Not only were there no more emperors before them, there was no road at all. A dizzy drop yawned out of the earth, a mighty crack in the fabric of the city. Squinting across, Jezel could just see the far side, a cliff of broken rock and crumbled mud. Beyond were the faint wraiths of walls and pillars, the outline of the wide avenue, melting out of sight and back as the rain swept through the empty air between. Longfoot cleared his throat. I take it, we will not be carrying on this way. Ever so carefully Jezel leaned from his saddle and peered down. Far below, dark water moved, foaming and churning, washing at the tortured ground beneath the foundations of the city. And out of this subterranean sea stuck broken walls, and shattered towers, and the cracked open shells of monstrous buildings. At the top of one tottering column a statue still stood, some hero long dead. His hand must once have been raised in triumph. Now it stuck up in desperation, as if he was pleading for someone to drag him from his watery hell. Jezel sat back, feeling suddenly dizzy. We will not be carrying on this way, he managed to croak. Bayaz frowned grimly down at the grinding water. Then we must find another, and quickly. The city is full of these cracks. We have miles to go even on a straight course, and a bridge to cross. Longfoot frowned, providing it still stands. It still stands, Canidius built to last. The first of the Magi peered up into the rain. The sky was already bruising, a dark weight hanging above their heads. We cannot afford to linger. We will not make it through the city before dark as it is. Jezal looked up at the magus, horrified. We'll be here overnight? Clearly, snapped Bayaz, turning his horse away from the brink. The ruins crowded in tighter around them as they left the Colleen way behind and struck out into the thick of the city. Jezel gazed up at the threatening shadows looming from the murk. The only thing he could imagine worse than being trapped in this place by day was being kept there in the darkness. He would have preferred to spend the night in hell, but what would have been the difference? The river surged below them through a man-made canyon-tall embankments of smooth, wet stone. The mighty Aos, imprisoned in that narrow space, foamed with infinite, mindless fury, chewing at the polished rock and spitting angry spray high into the air. Ferro could not imagine how anything could have lasted for long above that deluge. But Bayaz had been right. The Maker's Bridge still stood. In all my wide travels, in every city and nation under the bountiful sun, I have never seen such a wonder. Longfoot slowly shook his shaven head. How can a bridge be made from metal? But metal it was, dark, smooth, lustreless, gleaming with drops of water. It soared across the dizzy space in one simple arch, impossibly delicate, a spider's web of thin rods crisscrossing the hollow air beneath it, a wide road of slotted metal plates, stretching out perfectly level across the top, inviting them to cross. Every edge was sharp, every curve precise, every surface clean. It stood pristine in the midst of all that slow decay. As if it was finished yesterday, muttered Quai. And yet it is perhaps the oldest thing in the city. Bayaz nodded towards the ruins behind them. All the achievements of Juvens are laid waste, fallen, broken, forgotten, almost as though they had never been. But the works of the Master Maker are undiminished. They shine the brighter, if anything, for they shine in a darkened world. He snorted, and mist blew from his nostrils. Who knows? Perhaps they will still stand whole and unmarked at the end of time, long after all of us are in our graves. Luther peered nervously down towards the thundering water, no doubt wondering if his grave might be there. In the old time it carried thousands of people a day, tens of thousands. Horses and carts and citizens and slaves in an endless procession, flowing both ways, day and night. It will carry us. Ferro watched as the hooves of Bayaz's horse clanged out onto the metal. This maker was plainly a man of quite remarkable talents, murmured the navigator, urging his horse after. Quai snapped his reins. He was indeed. All lost to the world. 9 Fingers went next, then Luther reluctantly followed. Ferro stayed where she was, sitting in the pattering rain, frowning at the bridge, at the cart, at the 4 horses and their riders. She did not like this. The river, the bridge, the city, none of it. It had been feeling more and more like a trap with every step, and now she felt sure of it. She should never have listened to Yue. She should never have left the south. She had no business here, out in this freezing, wet, deserted wasteland with this gang of godless pinks. "I'm not going over that," she said. Bayaz turned to look at her. "Do you plan to fly across then, or simply stay on that side?" She sat back and crossed her hands before her on the saddlebow. "Perhaps I will. It might be better to discuss such matters once we have made it through the city," murmured Brother Longfoot, looking nervously back into the empty streets. "He's right," said Luther. "This place has an evil air." "Shit on its air," growled Ferro. "And shit on you. Why should I cross? What is it exactly that is so useful to me about that side of a river? You have promised me vengeance, old pink, and given me nothing but lies, and rain, and bad food. Why should I take another stride with you? Tell me that." Bayaz frowned. "My brother Yulwei helped you in the desert. You would have been killed if not for him. You gave him your word? Word? Ha! A word is an easy chain to break, old man." And she jerked her wrists apart in front of her. "There, I am free of it. I did not promise to make a slave of myself." The Magus gave vent to a long sigh, slumping wearily forward in his saddle. "As if life were not hard enough without your contributions. Why is it, Ferro, that you would rather make things difficult than easy? Perhaps God had some purpose in mind when he made me so, but I do not know it. What is the seed? Straight to the root of the matter." The old pink's eyes seemed to give a sudden twitch as she said the word. "Seed," muttered Luther, baffled. Bayaz frowned at the puzzled faces of the others. "It might be better not to know. Not good enough. If you fall asleep for a week again, I want to know what we are doing and why." "I am well recovered now," snapped Bayaz. But Ferro knew it for a lie. Every part of him seemed shrunken, older and weaker than it had been. He might have been awake and talking, but he was far from recovered. It would take more than bland assurances to fool her. "It will not happen again, you can depend on." "I will ask you one more time and hope at last for a simple answer. What is the seed?" Bayaz looked at her for a long moment, and she looked back. "Very well. We will sit in the rain and discuss the nature of things," and he nudged his horse back off the bridge until it was no more than a stride away. "The seed is one name for that thing that Glustrod dug for in the deep earth. It is that thing he used to do all this." "This," grunted Nine Fingers. "All this," and the first of the Magi swept his arm towards the wreckage that surrounded them. "The seed made a ruin of the greatest city in the world, and blighted the land about it from now until eternity." "It is a weapon, then," murmured Ferro. "It is a stone," said Quay suddenly, hunched on his cart, looking at no one. "A rock from the world below, left behind buried when Uz cast the devils from our world. It is the other side made flesh." "The very stuff of magic it is indeed," whispered Bayaz. "My congratulations, Master Quay. One subject at least of which you are not entirely ignorant. Well, ounces enough for you, Ferro? A rock did all this? Nine Fingers did not look happy. What in hell do we want with it? I think some among us can guess. Bayaz was looking at Ferro, right in the eye, and smiling a sickly grin, as if he knew exactly what she thought. Perhaps he did. It was no secret. Stories of devils and digging and old wet ruins, none of that mattered to Ferro. She was busy imagining the empire of Gurkhal made a dead land, its people vanished, its emperor forgotten, its cities brought to dust, its power a faded memory. Her mind churned with thoughts of death and vengeance. Then she smiled. "Good," she said. "But why do you need me?" "Who says I do need you that badly?" She snorted at him. "I doubt you would have suffered me this long if you didn't." "True enough. Then why?" "Because the seed cannot be touched. It is painful even to look upon. We came into the shattered city with the Emperor's army, after the fall of Glustrad, searching for survivors. We found none. Only horrors and ruins and bodies. Too many of those to count. Thousands upon thousands we buried, in pits for 100 each, all through the city. It was long work, and while we were about it, a company of soldiers found something strange in the ruins. Their captain wrapped it in his cloak and brought it to Juven's. By dusk he had withered and died, and his company were not spared. Their hair fell out, their bodies shriveled. Within a week, all 100 men were corpses, but Juven's himself was unharmed. He nodded at the cart. That is why Canedius made the box, and that is why we have it with us now. To protect us. None of us are safe, except for you. Why me? Did you never wonder why you are not as others are? Why you see no colors? Why you feel no pain? You are what Juven's was. And Canedius, you are what Glustrad was. You are what Ooze himself was, if it comes to that. Devil blood, murmured Quay. Blessed and cursed. Ferro glowered at him. What do you mean? You are descended from demons. And one corner of the apprentice's mouth curled up in a knowing smile. Far back into the old time and beyond, perhaps. But still, you are not entirely human. You are a relic. A last weak trace of the blood of the other side. Ferro opened her mouth to snarl an insult back at him, but Bayaz cut her off. There can be no denying it, Ferro. I would not have brought you if there were any doubt, but you should not seek to deny it. You should embrace it. It is a rare gift. You can touch the seed. Perhaps only you in all the wide circle of the world. Only you can touch it, and only you can carry it to war. He leaned close and whispered to her. But only I can make it burn, hot enough to turn all Gurkhal to a desert, hot enough to make bitter ashes of Khalul and all his servants, hot enough to make such vengeance that even you will have your fill of it, and more. Are you coming now? And he clicked his tongue, pulling his horse away and back onto the bridge. Ferro frowned at the old pink's back as she rode after him, chewing hard at her lip. When she licked it, she tasted blood. Blood, but no pain. She did not like to believe anything the Magus said. But there was no denying that she was not as others were. She remembered she had bitten a roof once, and he had told her that she must have had a snake for a mother. Why not a demon? She watched the water thundering by far below, through the slots in the metal, frowning and thinking on vengeance. Don't hardly matter whose blood you've got. Nine Fingers was riding beside her, riding badly, as usual, and looking across, voice gentle. Man makes his own choices, my father used to tell me. Reckon that goes for women just as much. Ferro did not answer. She dragged on her reins and let the others pull ahead. Woman or demon or snake, it made no difference. Her concern was hurting the Gurkish. Her hatred was strong and deep-rooted, warm and familiar. Her oldest friend. She could trust nothing else. Ferro was the last one off the bridge. She took a look back over her shoulder as they moved off into the crumbling city, towards the ruins they had come from, half hidden on the far bank by the grey shroud of drizzle. Yes, she jerked on her reins, glaring over the surging water, eyes flicking over the hundreds of empty windows, the hundreds of empty doorways, the hundreds of empty doorways, the hundreds of cracks and gaps and spaces in the crumbling walls. What did you see? Came Ninfinger's worried voice. Something. But she saw nothing now. Along the crumbling embankment, the endless shells of buildings squatted, empty and lifeless. There is nothing left alive in this place, said Bayaz. Night will find us soon. And I, for one, could do with a roof to keep the rain off my old bones tonight. Your eyes are playing tricks, Ferro scowled. Her eyes played no tricks, devil's eyes or no. There was something out there, in the city. She felt it, watching them. That's it for today's video. The next part arrives tomorrow. Subscribe so you don't miss it.